LoveLore Library. Chapter 1459. That day, when Hua Baoyue found out that she practiced magic, he was very curious and pestered her to show him a few. In exchange, he taught her a few types of exorcism magic, especially when it came to dealing with this kind of maze-like ghostly labyrinth. His method was even more effective. Hua Baoyue was not exaggerating. After Ning Xuemo used that method, the clouds in front of her immediately disappeared like a tide. Then, she found herself rushing towards the ground like a cannonball. She quickly stabilized her body. At this moment, she was only 100 to 200 meters away from the ground. If she did not break the ghostly labyrinth in time, she might have hit the craggy rocks on the ground in a few seconds and become a meat paste. She wiped the cold sweat on her head. Who was this bastard who tricked her like this? It was obvious that he wanted to kill her secretly. Fortunately, she broke the spell fast enough. Otherwise, she would not even know how she died. She paced back and forth, trying to find the person behind this. Just as she raised her head, she heard a vicious wind above her. She subconsciously dodged and a figure fell down beside her like a whirlwind. Helian Xiao. Ning Xuemo's eyes were sharp. She recognized the person's identity at a glance. This guy had an expression of a warrior breaking his wrist as he rushed down. It looked like he was about to hit a protruding mountain rock below. This idiot. Ning Xuemo raised her hand and a red rope appeared. It flew out like lightning and wrapped around Helian Xiao's waist. Then, she suddenly pulled. Helian Xiao flew back. Helian Xiao opened his eyes and roared, "So it's a spider demon. How dare you trap me? Take this." With a whoosh, he slapped towards Ning Xuemo. His skill was not low and his strength was not small either. This slap was like a hurricane. He wanted to slap Ning Xuemo away. Ning Xuemo's face darkened. The red rope in her hand suddenly shook. Helian Xiao was spun around like a windmill. Naturally, his slap missed. So powerful. I didn't expect a demoness like you to have some skills. Xuemo. Helian Xiao was halfway through his grand speech when he finally recognized Ning Xuemo. Originally, he had ferociously struck out with his palm, but after recognizing Ning Xuemo, he hastily retracted his palm. With a bang, it landed on his own body. With a muffled groan, his body flew out like a kite. Ning Xuemo. She had originally suspected that this Helian Xiao was some kind of demon impersonating him, but now, her suspicions were mostly dispelled. It should be this kid. He had probably encountered the same problem as himself, although Helian Xiao was in a sorry state when he landed this time, he wasn't injured. He only broke a few tree branches, tore a corner of his clothes, and scratched his face a little. He jumped up from the ground and looked at Ning Xuemo who was falling down with him. His face was filled with disbelief. "It's really you, Xuemo. Aren't you at the Sun Moon sect? Why are you here?" Ning Xuemo asked as she crossed her arms and stood 3 meters away from him. Helian Xiao scratched his head. I was ordered by my master to go to Phoenix City to handle some matters. I didn't expect to encounter this ghost hitting wall on the way. Damn it, what the hell set this up? I almost killed myself by hitting a rock. He kicked the big rock next to him fiercely. Ning Xuemo's eyes turned slightly. She raised her head and looked at the sky. White clouds floated by, but she couldn't see anything unusual. Did you see anything in the ghost-hitting wall just now? Or did you smell any evil aura? Ning Xuemo asked. Helian Xiao shook his head. I didn't smell any evil aura. It's really too evil. Chapter 1460. Helian Xiao recounted the scene that he had seen in the Sea of Clouds. It was similar to what Ning Xuemo saw, but Ning Xuemo was not trapped as long as he was. Helian Xiao looked left and right with a puzzled expression. Where is this? How did I fall here? Ning Xuemo was also observing the surrounding scenery. The scenery here was vaguely familiar to her, as if she had been here before. After a while, she finally recognized it. The sixth summit of Heavenly Book Mountain. Helian Xiao was dumbfounded. Heavenly Book Mountain. That's not right, right? I shouldn't have passed through Heavenly Book Mountain on my way to Phoenix City. Xuemo, are you sure you're not mistaken? Ning Xuemo shook her head. She was looking at a cliff in a daze. That cliff was the place where all kinds of strange snakes appeared. There, number 2 was kidnapped by the strange eagle of the ninth summit in order to protect her and lost his life. She was also carried to the ninth summit by the strange eagle and had a fortuitous encounter. She was suddenly stunned. She kept feeling that she met the most important person here, but she couldn't recall who it was. It was as if her memories of this place were forcefully erased. She was a little dazed. The little baby in her stomach was unwilling to be ignored and kicked her again, waking her up instantly. She shook her head. Solving the problem of hunger was the most important thing right now. Everything else should be put aside. She couldn't help but stroke her stomach. This little guy was quite strange. It was not even as big as her middle finger and was very small. It was not much bigger than a pigeon's egg, but it was very active and could actually kick her stomach from time to time. After all, it was the child of God. It was different from a normal baby. Normally, her stomach should be visible after 4 months of pregnancy, but she couldn't see it at all. Her waist was as slender as a willow. She could feel her baby's movements, but she couldn't see anything from her stomach. Xuemo, what's wrong with you? Helian Xiao waved his finger in front of her eyes. Nothing. Ning Xuemo came back to her senses and turned to ask Helian Xiao, are you hungry? She looked at Helian Xiao with bright eyes. Helian Xiao nodded honestly. I'm hungry. Good. I'll go hunting, and you can barbecue. How about that? Ning Xuemo immediately divided the work. She was good at hunting, but she was not good at barbecuing. The food she cooked was either burnt or not cooked, which made her speechless. Helian Xiao immediately raised his head. Hunting is a man's job. It's better that I go hunting. You're in charge of the barbecue. Cut the crap. Do as I say. Ning Xuemo did not give him a chance to refute. She immediately got up and prepared to go hunting. Just as she stood up, her head suddenly felt dizzy. She swayed a little before regaining her footing. Xuemo, are you feeling unwell? Helian Xiao stared at her face, his eyes filled with worry. Ning Xuemo shook her head slightly. She didn't want anyone to know about her pregnancy, especially the people from the Sun Moon sect. Thus, even though Helian Xiao was her friend, she didn't want to tell him. After all, Helian Xiao was a blabbermouth. Who knew when this news would reach that person's ears? He was afraid that it would add unnecessary variables. So what if he knew about this child? Even if he knew that this child was his, with his personality, he would probably keep her by his side and keep her as a concubine. Just like in those CEO novels, they were only interested in the child and kept the child's mother for the sake of the child. It was a pity that she was no longer interested in him. Not to mention being his concubine, even if he broke off his engagement with Lu Xin and married her, she wouldn't be willing. Chapter 1461. Therefore, now that things had developed to this point, she didn't want him to know about this child and had to think of a way to hide it. Probably because she was too hungry, she felt a burning sensation in her stomach, as if a few small hands were scratching it. It was very uncomfortable. Cold sweat appeared on her forehead as she sat down on a big rock. I'm fine. I'm probably tired from the journey. Then you rest here. I'll go hunting and barbecue when I come back. Don't worry, I'm very good at barbecuing. I guarantee that you'll want to eat more after you eat. Helian Xiao was very considerate. He turned around and left, but after walking a few steps, he was still worried. Xuemo, are you really okay? This guy was treating her like a piece of paper. Ning Xuemo waved her hand. Go, I'm fine. This was the 6th peak of the Heavenly Book Mountains, and the level of the demonic beasts wasn't high. She was fine when she was a rookie, let alone now. It was fine if those demonic beasts didn't come, but if they did, she could kill them in a matter of minutes and make them her food. Helian Xiao finally left. Ning Xuemo simply sat on the big rock and meditated. She said it casually, but she was still on guard in her heart. After all, the owner of the Ghost Hits wall, that looked like a sea of clouds, hadn't appeared yet, so she couldn't not be on guard. She looked like she was meditating, but in fact, all the senses in her body were activated, not letting go of the slightest movement in her surroundings. Ah! Suddenly, a cry of surprise came from afar. It sounded like Helian Zhao's voice. Damn, he couldn't have met the owner of the Ghost Hits wall, right? Ning Xuemo's figure rose, and she followed the sound like a wisp of smoke. Her current speed was extremely fast, and her judgment of direction was accurate. In almost the blink of an eye, she ran a few miles away. After a moment, she already saw Helian Zhao's figure. At the same time, she paused her steps. In the middle of countless tall trees, there was a short and sturdy peach tree. Countless big pink peaches hung on the peach tree, swaying gently with the breeze. It looked very attractive. Helian Xiao was holding a pheasant and a rabbit in his hands. At this moment, he was staring at the big peach, lost in thought. He probably heard Ning Xuemo flying over and turned around. Xuemo, look, what a big peach. The fragrance of the peaches made the already hungry people even hungrier. However, Ning Xuemo did not want to pick them. It was late spring now. It was normal to see peach blossoms in the mountains, but peaches shouldn't be ripe at this time. There must be something fishy going on. She was pregnant now, so she couldn't eat anything carelessly. She also expressed her own point of view, but Helian Xiao disapproved. Xuemo, you're too careful. After all, this was the Heavenly Book Mountain, and there were many strange trees and monsters. Perhaps the earth energy here was special, and the peaches ripened at this time of the year. Perhaps the Queen Mother of the West's peaches of immortality fell here by mistake. Let's pick a few first to fill our stomachs. Without any explanation, he flew up and quickly plucked 2 big peaches. The big peaches were pink and white, and their appearance was indeed very attractive. Helian Xiao casually handed one to Ning Xuemo. That's right, your poison skills are quite good. Take a look and check it first. Ning Xuemo could only accept it. She turned the peach over and over again to examine it. She was an expert in poisons, so she could naturally tell if the peach was poisonous or not. The result of the examination was that the peach was not poisonous. Instead, it had a very special kind of light immortal energy that made people feel very comfortable. Helian Xiao thought for a moment. After all, he was still not at ease. He gave the peach in his hand to the rabbit that was kicking its legs in his hand to take a bite. Then, he placed the rabbit on the ground to check its reaction. Chapter 1462. The rabbit was very healthy and lively. After eating 1 bite, it still wanted to eat a second bite. After putting it on the ground, it wasn't in a hurry to run away. Instead, it looked at the peach in Helian Zhao's hand with a greedy look in its eyes. Helian Xiao generously threw the peach in his hand to the rabbit. The rabbit immediately jumped over and gnawed on it. After a while, only the pit of the peach was left. After the rabbit finished eating, it still wanted more. It circled around Helian Xiao and couldn't bear to leave. A silly rabbit. This was Ning Xuema's only evaluation of the rabbit. The rabbit was still alive and kicking. Helian Xiao heaved a sigh of relief. I knew it. This peach looks like an immortal and doesn't seem poisonous. Come, let's eat this first. I'll roast some pheasants and rabbits for you later. He went up the tree and plucked 2 more peaches. He gnawed on one and threw the other one to Ning Xuema. He quickly gnawed on one. When he raised his head, he saw Ning Xuema standing in the same place and looking at him. She didn't have any intention to eat it. Xuema, what's wrong? This peach is very fragrant and sweet. It's not poisonous. Why don't you eat it? Ning Xuema sighed. Lian Xiao, did you forget? I don't eat peaches. Helian Xiao was stunned. Is that so? I really forgot. Ning Xuema continued to look at him. I remember that you don't eat peaches either. Once you eat this, you'll get red bumps all over your body and feel uncomfortable. At that time, you even said that the most disgusting fruit in the world was peaches. Helian Xiao was speechless. His expression changed slightly. He paused for a moment, slapped his head and said in annoyance, I haven't eaten this for so long. I actually forgot that eating this thing is uncomfortable. However, the taste of this peach is really not bad. It's different from ordinary peaches. Try it. Maybe you'll be willing to eat it. Is that so? Ning Xuema seemed to be tempted. Sure enough, she brought the peach close to her lips. Helian Xiao couldn't help but stare at her. Ning Xuema moved the peach away from her lips again and asked Helian Xiao indifferently, Oh right, Lian Xiao, I remember you said that your mother likes to eat peaches the most. Why don't you pick a few more and give them to your mother? Wasn't it her 60th birthday in a few days? This is perfect as a birthday gift. Helian Xiao paused again and patted his head, that's right. My mother loves it. Then I'll pick a few more and bring them back. This kind of peach was rare and hard to come by. It might even have the effect of prolonging one's lifespan. As he spoke, he went up the tree to pick peaches. In one breath, he picked 7 or 8 peaches and put them into the storage space. He jumped down from the tree and glanced at Ning Xuema. Hey, Xuema, you haven't tried it yet. Ning Xuema smiled. I'll try it now. She raised her hand, seemingly wanting to bring the peach to her lips again. Suddenly, her hand trembled, and the peach in her hand flew towards Helian Xiao like lightning. At the same time, a raging fire dragon flew over. The fire dragon bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it pounced towards Helian Xiao. Helian Xiao was caught off guard and almost got hit by the fire dragon. He hurriedly dodged and used several types of body movements in succession to avoid it. Xuema, what's wrong with you? He jumped onto a big rock and shouted in astonishment. Ning Xuema smiled. Nothing, I just wanted to test your ability. With a wave of her hand, the surrounding rocks all flew up and continued to smash towards Helian Xiao. Helian Xiao's expression changed slightly. Every rock that Ning Xuema threw over contained a strong gust of wind. What was worse was that these rocks were actually burning. Chapter 1463. No matter which one hit him, it would be enough for him to bear the consequences. He dodged again and again. A brilliant glazed sword appeared in his palm. The sword ray rose and formed a protective barrier around his body. All the stones smashed into the barrier, causing the sword ray to tremble like water ripples. His wrist was numb from the tremors. Fortunately, all the stones were blocked by him. Shuama, this joke isn't funny. He finally breathed in. Who said it's not funny? Didn't we often compete like this in the past? Ning Shuama laughed. Her hands didn't stop at all. With a wave of her hand, countless sharp wooden swords appeared in the air. The tips of the swords were similarly burning as she continued to attack Helian Xiao. Every move of hers was a killer move. When Helian Xiao used his sword to block again, those wooden swords once again split into countless fine needles under the effect of his sword. They covered the sky and covered the earth as they shot towards him. Helian Xiao's expression changed greatly. He couldn't care about anything else and used all his strength to block. The sword in his palm slashed and struck continuously. Finally, most of the wooden fine needles were sent flying. However, because there were too many fine needles, there were still some that slipped through the net even though he desperately blocked them. 3 or 4 needles pierced his body, causing burning pain. A fine needle pierced his wrist. His hand trembled and he almost threw away the sword in his hand. Once Ning Shuama started to attack, she didn't leave the slightest bit of leeway. Wave after wave, every move and every style was like a tidal wave, attacking to the point that Helian Xiao couldn't breathe. He simply didn't have any leeway to retaliate. He finally sensed that something was wrong. He suddenly flew up and floated in the air. With a wave of his hand, he set up a barrier around his body and finally blocked another round of Ning Shuama's attacks. You actually saw through it. He opened his mouth and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Ning Shuama looked at him coldly. You revealed too much of your foxtail. This person wasn't Helian Xiao. Damn it, he actually pretended to be her friend to trick her. Fortunately, she was quick-witted and didn't fall for his evil trick. Strange, no matter if it was this person's expression or bearing, even the smell on his body was no different from Helian Xiao's. How did he do it? Helian Xiao's disguise had been seen through, so he stopped pretending. He was curious. Where did you find out? No one had ever seen through his disguise before. What's more, his disguise this time was as if he was possessed. It could be said to be the highest level of disguise. Even an emperor might not be able to see through it. Ning Shuama looked at him. A man who hides his head and shows his tail is not a hero. Show me your true face first, then I'll answer you. The man sighed softly. I'm not afraid of revealing my true face. I'm just afraid that you'll be too shocked and scare the child away. Ning Shuama's expression changed. No one in this world knew that she was pregnant. Even Shinjiuli did not know about it. How did this man know about it? This person was not simple. He was familiar with Helian Xiao and wanted to trap her. Moreover, the way he dodged just now was extremely nimble and graceful. There was no need to ask, the bewitching array in the air was also set up by him. He could even see that she was pregnant. Therefore, his power should be above Earth rank level 9. He was her. Ning Shuama narrowed her eyes. Lizine. A strange look flashed through the man's eyes and he suddenly chuckled. You're indeed smart enough. A human can actually be so smart, it's really beyond my expectations. This time, it was a clear female voice, undoubtedly revealing her identity. Since she had been recognized, she was too lazy to continue her disguise. She floated in the air and revealed her true face. Chapter 1464. She was wearing a red dress, her figure was light and graceful, and her beauty was hard to describe. She was like a fairy descending to the mortal world. She was Shinjiuli's current fiancée, Lizine. Ning Shuama's gaze subconsciously turned to her forehead. There was a jeweled headband on her forehead, but she couldn't tell if she had that special cinnabar mole. However, since she had gone through the immortal Empress tribulation, she should have it, right? Or maybe Shinjuli's concubine and wife had gone through different tribulations, so the cinnabar mole looked different too. After she was struck by lightning, she had a six-sided, snowflake-shaped cinnabar mole. It was as red as a coral bean. Later on, she won the bet with him and became his disciple. The concubine contract was automatically cancelled, but the cinnabar mole on her forehead didn't disappear completely. It only gradually turned from snowflake-shaped to round, and it lost its previous special function. Its color also became lighter. If his concubine had a snowflake-shaped cinnabar mole on her forehead, then what about his wife? What would she look like? Stop. She had nothing to do with that person, so what was the point of thinking about all these? How did you recognize me? Lizine was still puzzled. Ning Xuemo sneered and said slowly, "You are indeed very talented in acting. Your role is also very similar, but you are too impatient." Ah. What do you mean? Lizine raised her eyebrows and smiled. She liked to smile, looking innocent and charming. Especially when she blinked her big eyes, there was an indescribable sweetness and charm. Ning Xuemo looked at her smile and suddenly had an extremely strange feeling. Lizine's appearance didn't look like her, but her expression seemed to have the same effect. She sneered, "Are you very strange?" Lizine blinked again, "Yes." Ning Xuemo also smiled, "I'm not telling you." Actually, when she met Helian Xiao, she felt a little strange because it was too much of a coincidence. However, she didn't want to suspect her friend, so she still dealt with him for a while. Lizine's acting as Helian Xiao was flawless. No matter whether it was her expression or her actions, they were the same person. This made Ning Xuemo suspect that she was being too paranoid. It wasn't until Helian Xiao went hunting and encountered a peach tree and cried out in surprise that her suspicions rose again. Although Helian Xiao was bright, he wasn't someone who would be easily surprised. Even more so, he wouldn't be surprised when he saw a strange peach tree. Even if he was slightly surprised, he definitely wouldn't let out a cry of surprise. It was as if he had deliberately lured her here. Therefore, Ning Xuemo played along and dealt with him. This person obviously wanted to trick her into eating the peach. He wanted to trick her, but she really didn't find anything wrong with the peach. By then, she was already 80% sure that this person was an imposter, but in order to confirm it, she deliberately asked him some questions. In reality, Helian Xiao wasn't allergic to peaches. Furthermore, he really did like to eat them. When they were both in the Sun-Moon sect, he had even given her a few as a gift out of filial piety. Ning Xuemo also ate peaches, so she didn't have this taboo. And from this question, Lizine revealed a second flaw. As for the third flaw, it was even more obvious. Helian Xiao lost his mother when he was young. His mother had passed away long ago. How could he celebrate his 60th birthday? These were all made up by Ning Xuemo. And Lizine was afraid of revealing a flaw, so she also answered carelessly. She really went up the tree to pick peaches to make longevity peaches. At this point, Ning Xuemo was finally certain that the person in front of her was an imposter. Chapter 1465. Then why should she be polite? Of course, she would take action immediately. She had finally forced her to reveal her true colors. "I didn't know that a mighty immortal like you would do something so despicable. Lizine, you are a disgrace to the word mighty immortal." Ning Xuemo reprimanded her impolitely. Lizine's charming face slightly reddened, but she immediately smiled. "Ning Xuemo, I think you have a wrong understanding of the word immortal. Also, this immortal's actions can't be considered wretched. I was merely following orders." Following orders. Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows and looked at her with a faint smile. "Whose orders?" Luzine smiled innocently, but the question she answered was not naive at all. Who do you think? She smiled again. Someone doesn't want you to have this child, but it's not convenient for him to do it himself, so he hinted for me to come. She didn't mention anyone's name in her words, but the hint was too obvious, and the direction was also very obvious. After saying this, her bright eyes fell on Ning Xuemo's face. She knew that with Ning Xuemo's intelligence, she would be able to guess who this person was. She was waiting for her to change her expression. It would definitely be beautiful. She was looking forward to it with evil intentions. Ning Xuemo smiled. She crossed her arms and looked at her coldly. Luzine, your plan to shift the blame onto someone else is not bad. Do you think I will believe it? Although Shinjioli had wronged her, she still understood his character very well. If he knew that she had this child, he would most likely take responsibility and keep her. He would definitely not harm the child. Even if he did not want this child, he would come himself and do it cleanly instead of asking someone else to do it. Luzine was obviously trying to provoke her with this. Did she think that Ning Xuemo was an idiot? Luzine's expression changed slightly. She did not expect that she would be seen through so quickly. She smiled and said leisurely, "Poor human, I'm just telling you the truth. It has nothing to do with me whether you believe it or not. It's good that you don't believe it. At least you can deceive yourself." This Luzine appeared to be all smiles, but her words were venomous. Every word she said pushed the blame onto Shinjioli. If it was someone with a slightly weaker mind, they might really be enraged by her. However, the person she met was Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo had been hanging out in various social circles all these years. What kind of people had she not met? People like Luzine might not be common in this world, but in Ning Xuemo's world, there were plenty of them. In all kinds of palace dramas, this kind of character was endless, so she was already immune to this kind of person. Her provocative words were treated like dog farts, and she didn't take it to heart at all. The feeling of hunger in her stomach was even stronger now. It was as if her heart and liver were being scratched, and her legs were a little weak. She looked calm on the surface, but she was anxious on the inside. Luzine obviously came with ill intentions. If Ning Xuemo wasn't in such a state, she might be able to fight Luzine to a draw. However, in her current state, it was extremely disadvantageous for her. Luzine, why didn't you stay by your fiancé's side in the Sun-Moon sect? What are you doing here? Could it be that your fiancé still can't forget about me, causing you to be jealous? But you don't dare to find trouble with him, so you came to find trouble with me. In terms of venomous words, Ning Xuemo was not inferior to Luzine. Luzine's pretty face changed slightly, but she immediately smiled again. I said that I was ordered by him to take the life of your child. How could he still be thinking about you? If you didn't cause a ruckus at our engagement banquet, he wouldn't have even thought of you. Chapter 1466. You don't know how good he is to me. We eat and sleep together. He can't leave me even for a moment. Oh, is that so? Ning Xuemo crossed her arms. Aren't you imagining things? If he really treats you well, why would he send you to do such a despicable thing? If this matter spreads to the martial arts world, your reputation will be greatly affected. Luzine was speechless. She didn't expect Ning Xuemo to be so sharp-tongued. She didn't know what to say. Ning Xuemo smiled again. What's the matter? Did I step on your sore spot? Ning Xuemo took a few steps forward and stared at her intently. He doesn't even know that you're here, right? You know that I'm pregnant and you're afraid that I'll use the child as a reason to come here secretly. You want to kill me and the child without anyone knowing, right? Luzine pursed her red lips and clenched her fists in her sleeves. Ning Xuemo was like a roundworm in her stomach. She had exposed her wishful thinking. She looked down at Ning Xuemo. She couldn't help but admit that this human woman was terrifyingly smart. No wonder he couldn't forget about her and even called out her name when he was unconscious. Her conspiracy had been exposed. There was no point in hiding it anymore. Lu Xin sighed softly. You can think whatever you want. However, I think I should make one thing clear. I'm not here to kill you. I just want to kill your child. It's a bastard and shouldn't have come to this world. So, it's better to end it as soon as possible. Ning Xuemo, no matter what, you and my brother Di are no longer together. Why do you want to have his child? It's better to end it once and for all. This way, you won't feel burdened when you marry someone else. It won't be easy for you to find another man with a child. Look, I'm actually quite considerate of you, right? Ning Xuemo's pretty face turned cold. She was shocked by Lu Xin's theory. For a fairy to say such a strange thing, she must be drunk. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but her face suddenly turned pale. Her body swayed slightly, but she quickly steadied herself. Lu Xin, how do you know that the child in my stomach is his? Lu Xin stared at her face and slowly landed on the ground. She took 2 steps forward and smiled again. She said leisurely, you probably don't know my identity, right? I am from the noblest Jade Water Fox clan in this world. The Jade Water Fox clan has a special ability, and my special ability is that I can see through things with my eyes. I can see where the disease is, and naturally I can see that there is a little bastard in your stomach. Ning Xuemo was speechless. So this fox had a pair of X-ray eyes. But this doesn't prove that the child is his. After all, to the people of this world, I haven't seen him for 10 years. Ning Xuemo wasn't stupid. She didn't mention the child at Shinjuli's engagement party because she didn't want to talk about the child. If her love could only be won by the child, then what was the difference between it and a shotgun marriage? She would rather not have such a love. Secondly, she understood that under such circumstances, even if she suppressed her anger and told him about the child, Shinjuli might not believe her. To him, she had been separated from him for 10 years. How could he believe that the child in her stomach was only 4 months old? It was impossible. There was no DNA test in this world, and the child was still in her stomach. Chapter 1467. There was no DNA verification in this world. Furthermore, the child was still in her womb. Even if they used the unreliable method of blood identification, they would have to wait until the child was born. If she had gritted her teeth and said it, no one would have believed her. She would have just been asking for humiliation. How did Lu Xin know that her baby was Shinjuli's? This was what Ning Xuemo couldn't understand the most. Lu Xin probably wanted to show off her abilities. She smiled and said, the bastard in your womb is already 4 months old, but your belly doesn't show at all. Furthermore, it's much smaller than a normal human fetus. It's obviously developing later. It's so small, yet it's so restless. Its limbs are much stronger than a normal fetus. More importantly, there's a trace of purplish gold light around its body. I've only seen this on Brother D. Therefore, I guessed that it's his bastard. Do you have any objections? Ning Xuemo was speechless. It seemed that Lu Xin's eyes were indeed special. She could only see the child's appearance when she used her inner vision. She couldn't see any purplish gold light at all. Lu Xin, it seems that you know a lot about a pregnant woman's fetus. You can even say what the month should look like so accurately. Are you a midwife? Lu Xin was furious. How can I, a fox immortal, do such a lowly job? In fact, ever since she discovered that she had this ability, she specially went to the human world to observe all kinds of people. Among them, she paid the most attention to pregnant women. Of course, she couldn't tell Ning Xuemo about this. She sized up Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo, you seem to be stalling for time by talking to me like this. Are you waiting for reinforcements? She tilted her head and thought for a while. Then, she smiled again. You want to wait for Helian Xiao to come. That child won't be able to come for a while. He's still in one place. He won't come out for a day and a night. Even if he comes, he won't be able to save you. Helian Xiao really came out. Ning Xuemo took a step forward. Lu Xin, what did you do to him? Lu Xin pursed her lips. Nothing. He's the most promising child in Brother D's sect. I can't wait to dote on him. How could I bear to do anything to him? She looked at Ning Xuemo again and said sincerely, I'm an immortal. I don't kill easily. I don't even want your life. I'm just waiting for that bastard to fall out, and then I'll let you go. Look, I'm still very kind. Ning Xuemo chuckled. What a pity that your scheme didn't succeed. I didn't eat any peaches. Lu Xin suddenly laughed. Ning Xuemo, you're very smart. However, do you really think that I only have the falling infant peach? Since I don't want you to keep this child, I naturally have to come up with a foolproof plan. Have you been feeling especially hungry and feverish? Why do my hands and feet feel cold? Ning Xuemo's expression changed. What Lu Xin said was indeed her current symptoms. She slowly clenched her fingers. What else did you do? Lu Xin looked at her happily. You know too little about the Jade Water Fox clan. Thousands of years ago, the Jade Water continent's resources were exhausted because of our excessive reproduction. Therefore, the elders of the Lake clan thought of a special method. They released a type of poison in the air. This poison is colorless and odorless. It's nothing to ordinary people, but if a pregnant woman smells it, she'll automatically abort her baby. Chapter 1468. The symptoms before miscarriage is when the fetus is struggling in the womb. The pregnant woman will feel extremely hungry and weak, and her stomach will heat up. Normally, after an hour, even the healthiest baby will fall out. Ning Xuemo's face turned pale and she took a step back. No, she didn't believe it. There was no poison in this world that she couldn't smell. If there was such a poison in the air, she would definitely be able to detect it. Lu Xin must be trying to scare her. It must be. Nothing would happen to her baby. It was the child of God. Back when she was thrown into the ice purgatory and boiled in the copper cauldron, her baby could still survive. It was impossible for it to fall out after smelling the poison of the Fox clan. Lu Xin looked at her pale face and became even more proud. Only the Fox clan's clan leader and the elder who executes this method know how to use this secret technique. Moreover, the elder's identity is very mysterious. Even the people of the Fox clan don't know about it. They don't even know about this secret technique. And I was once the elder who was given this special mission. I have already used it more than 10 times, and no one was lucky enough to escape. Ning Xuemo. She didn't want to talk to Lu Xin now. She had to protect her baby. Her stomach was indeed heating up, and the burning sensation in her stomach was like a knife scraping her stomach. Not only was she hungry, but she was also starting to feel pain. It was as if something couldn't endure and wanted to eat her flesh. Something was wrong. Something was really wrong. The reason why she was stalling for time was because she had released a colorless and odorless poison in the air. This poison could make a person's limbs go weak after an hour. Lu Xin had schemed against her baby, so how could Ning Xuemo let her off so easily? Therefore, she had already vowed to teach Lu Xin a lesson that she would remember for the rest of her life. She had talked so much with Lu Xin because she was waiting for the poison to take effect. However, she didn't expect that Lizine had already set a trap for her and poisoned her. Ning Xuemo retreated step by step. She could take revenge on Lizine later. She had to leave immediately to see her baby. What's wrong? Are you scared? Lizine approached him step by step and smiled even more proudly. I forgot to tell you that the falling infant peach is also a specialty of our jade water. It's normal to eat this kind of peach normally. However, even if a pregnant woman were to smell it or touch it, she would be infected with the smell of peaches. Coupled with my special poison skills, even an iron fetus would fall from my body. So, Ning Xuemo, don't make any more useless struggles. Your child can't be saved. She raised her head to look at the sun in the sky before her gaze landed on Ning Xuemo's stomach. It's almost time. Right now, your stomach is starting to hurt. That vile spawn is already struggling with all its might and crying. It doesn't want to leave this world. Ning Xuemo's face turned pale. She really did have a stomachache. The pain in his abdomen was like a knife being twisted. Her fetus was already moving violently just now, and now it was even more violent. She couldn't care less about anything else. She didn't even care that her love rival, Lizine, was watching her like a tiger watching its prey. She immediately used her inner vision to check. She found that the fluid in her womb had turned red and muddy. The small fetus was struggling painfully inside, bobbing up and down in the amniotic fluid. Lizine didn't take advantage of Ning Xuemo's inner vision to plot against her. She had probably been waiting for this scene, so she stood there leisurely and didn't forget to mock and ridicule her. Chapter 1469. How is it? I didn't lie to you, did I? It's about to die. Her words were like knives that pierced through Gu Shizhou's heart. Ning Xuemo raised her head abruptly. Her watery eyes were slightly red. She said word by word, "Give me the antidote. Lizine, if anything happens to my baby, I'll make sure you die with him." You have to have the ability to do so. Ning Xuemo, you're just a little human. What right do you have to fight with me, a fox immortal? What right do you have to fight with me for the same man? Lizine said happily. She seemed to have been holding it in for a long time. Now that she could finally vent her anger, she naturally wouldn't let go of any chance to attack Gu Shizhou. Ning Xuemo looked down. Don't I have the chance? Lizine, touch something 3 inches below your ribs. Lizine laughed. Who are you trying to scare? Although she said that, she still touched the area below her ribs. Her expression suddenly changed. The area 3 inches below her ribs felt like she was stung by a wasp. It was as painful as being cut by a knife. The pain shuttled through her body like electricity, directly hitting her limbs and bones. Cold sweat instantly appeared on her forehead. She took 2 steps back. You! What did you do to me? Poison. Ning Xuemo's words were concise and comprehensive. You schemed against my child, so I originally wanted to teach you a lesson. That's why I poisoned you just now. I didn't stall for time to wait for reinforcements, but for the poison to flare up. Lizine, give me the antidote and I'll let you live. Lizine was speechless. She started to retreat step by step. As she tried to expel the poison, she said, "Let me think." Ning Xuemo didn't have time for her to think. She had taken a few pregnancy-stabilizing drugs and even used her wood psychokinesis to purify the blood in her womb. However, it was useless. She had never seen Lizine's poison before. She couldn't make the antidote at the moment. In this situation, she didn't have the time to make a new antidote. Therefore, her only hope was to snatch it from Lizine. The struggle of the baby in her belly had slowed down. It was obvious that it could not hold on any longer. The anger in Ning Xuemo's chest surged like a tidal wave, but she had to remain calm at this moment. Suppressing the pain in her stomach, she stretched out her hand and a sharp steel knife appeared in her palm. In a flash, she pointed the tip of the knife at Luzine's chest. "I'll give you 3 seconds. If you don't take out the antidote, I'll make you regret being born in this world." Her movements were as fast as lightning. Luzine was trying her best to expel the poison from her body, so she couldn't dodge at all. Seeing Ning Xuemo pointing the steel knife at her chest, Luzine shouted, "Ning Xuemo, you can't hurt me. If you hurt me, he won't let you off." Ning Xuemo's response to her was to stab her. Luzine wanted to dodge but failed. Although she managed to avoid being stabbed in the chest, she was stabbed in the ribs by Ning Xuemo. Fresh blood immediately gushed out and Luzine let out a blood-curdling scream. She wanted to retreat, but Ning Xuemo grabbed her by the collar. She couldn't retreat anymore. Ning Xuemo slowly turned the steel knife in her right hand on Luzine's flesh. The antidote. Luzine's forehead was dripping with cold sweat. She didn't know what kind of curse Ning Xuemo's steel saber had attached to it, but it was actually able to pierce through Luzine's protective barrier in an instant. Not only did it pierce through her flesh, but it also pierced through her bone marrow. Okay, I'll give it to you. Let me go." Luzine couldn't help but beg for mercy. She started to regret not escaping in time. "Take it now." Ning Xuemo wouldn't let her go. Chapter 1470. Luzine was in so much pain that she wanted to push Ning Xuemo away. However, her limbs were weak, she could only search around her body. After a while, she found a small jade bottle. This is the antidote. Take 3 pills." Ning Xuemo snatched the jade bottle. There were several red pills rolling around inside. Without thinking, she poured out 3 pills and stuffed them into Luzine's mouth. "Swallow them." Luzine knew that she did not trust her and wanted her to test the medicine. Hence, she swallowed them and opened her mouth to show Ning Xuemo. I swallowed them. Look. I'm not lying to you. Alright, we'll do as you said. I'll give you the antidote and you let me go." Ning Xuemo swung her hand and flung her onto a large rock. She then proceeded to seal several of her major acupoints. Luzine was paralyzed on the ground like a dead fish, unable to move. Her expression changed. "Ning Xuemo, you didn't keep your words. As long as my baby is fine, I'll let you go immediately. If you continue to play tricks, Luzine, you can't imagine the consequences." Luzine's face was still pale. She closed her eyes. You can try it." Ning Xuemo's stomach was in so much pain. She had tried all kinds of methods, but none of them could stop the pain. Although she had never had a miscarriage before, the symptoms were too obvious. If she did not make a decision soon, she would lose her baby. She had no other way out. Hence, she threatened Luzine. Seeing that Luzine had no other reaction and did not seem to be up to any tricks, she could only try her best and trust her this time. She finally swallowed the antidote and sat there carefully, waiting for the pain to disappear. "Little Munchkin, nothing must happen to you. You must hang in there. You must stay with Mommy. You're the only one left. You must hang in there. Don't leave me, Mommy bought you a lot of good things. There's food, useful things, and clothes. You'll definitely like them. So, you must survive and hang in there. You're so obedient. You're so considerate. You must be reluctant to leave Mommy, right? So, hang in there. Baby, you have to hold on." Her forehead was covered in cold sweat, and so were her palms. Not only was it painful, but more importantly, it was fear. He had never been so scared before. As time passed, the tearing pain in his stomach seemed to show signs of subsiding. Ning Xuema sat there in a daze. Her full attention was attracted by the movement in her belly. She used her psychokinesis to carefully protect that place so that it would not vibrate at all. Lizine collapsed on the big rock at the side. She didn't say a word and just closed her eyes. She didn't know if it was because of the shock or the pain, but she was sweating profusely. Beads of sweat rolled down her skin like sparkling pearls. After about half an hour, the pain in Ning Xuema's stomach finally subsided. She heaved a sigh of relief and immediately used her inner vision to check. Then, she found that the fetus's body was slowly straightening. What was going on? Ning Xuema felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Just as she was about to take a closer look, she suddenly felt a surge of heat in the indescribable part of her dress. With a splash, it dyed her dress red. Ning Xuema's fingers trembled. She reached out and touched the liquid on her dress. It was sticky and bright red. It was blood. Her vision suddenly turned black. It was as if she had been hit in the face with a stick. It also felt as if she was falling into the depths of a dark ice abyss. Chapter 1471. Her stomach started to hurt again. This time, it was a dull pain, as if something was being peeled off inch by a small knife. Waves of heat flowed out from under his body, one after another. Her mind was blank. Her hands trembled as she desperately pressed on her acupoints and covered her stomach. She used every method she could think of to try and persuade him to stay. There seemed to be a cry in her mind. The cry was weak and sharp, and it was heartbreaking. It seemed to be calling for her mother, but it also seemed to be crying out in pain. It made Ning Xuema's heart feel like it was being torn apart. It was so painful that her vision turned black. She had completely forgotten about her existence. She just mechanically busied herself again and again. No one could understand her feelings of despair at this moment. At this moment, it was as if everything in the world had lost its color and turned into black and white. The blood soaked through her dress. The blood that was originally warm now made her feel extremely cold, extremely cold. She had lost her treasure in the end. Lost. Lost. He had lost it. A sorrowful aura was emitted from her body. The surrounding air became cold, and the green grass around her started to freeze. Lizine, who had been paralyzed beside her, suddenly jumped up. She was in so much pain that she was sweating profusely. However, she had finally used her immortal power to force the poison out of her body. The layer of sweat just now was from when she was forcing the poison out of her body. She was really frightened at that time. She was afraid that Ning Xuema would see through her little trick. Fortunately, Ning Xuema's attention was completely focused on the child, so she simply didn't notice her. It seemed like she really cared about the bastard in her stomach. Without the child, she would not be able to pester her brother D in the future. Only then could brother D truly let go and accept her, and not just help her pass the lightning tribulation. After she had almost cleared the poison, she started to use her immortal power to break through the sealed acupoints. After all, she was an immortal and a medical immortal. Therefore, although she did not know Ning Xuema's special acupoint sealing technique, she still managed to break through it in a short time. The moment she broke through it was also the moment Ning Xuema really miscarried. When she jumped up, she felt an indescribable sense of relief in her heart. The poison was detoxified, the acupoints were unsealed, the wounds were healed, and her power was almost completely restored. What was there to be afraid of? There was nothing to be afraid of. The moment she jumped up, she subconsciously glanced at Ning Xuema. Her heart suddenly turned cold. Ning Xuema's aura was too cold. That cold aura formed an inexplicably powerful pressure that spread out in all directions. The plants withered and the flowers withered. There was originally no wind in the valley, but at this moment, a cold gust of wind blew, causing Lizine, who was a fox immortal, to tremble. When Lizine jumped up, she originally wanted to plot against Ningxuema and take the opportunity to get rid of all future troubles. However, when she saw Ningxuema's current state, she didn't dare to do so. Pausing for a moment, he suddenly turned around and flew away. Forget it. Since the vile spawn had been eliminated, this human woman would not be able to cause much trouble. There was no need for her to waste any more time here. She floated up. Her posture was very graceful and peerless. She was indescribably beautiful. However, Ningxuema did not raise her head. She seemed to be completely immersed in sorrow and could not extricate herself. The flowers and trees around her were completely frozen. That murderous aura made people tremble uncontrollably. Lizine was overjoyed. Just as she was about to fly faster, she slammed into something with a bang. She was caught off guard and was dizzy from the impact. Her forehead was burning with pain. Chapter 1472. She quickly stabilized herself and raised her hand to touch it. There was a bump. She was shocked and looked up. Not far above her, there was a light red barrier. That barrier seemed to have blood flowing on it, flashing with a mysterious and ominous light. She had bumped into it just now, which was why she almost fell down. Her heart suddenly sank. This human girl actually knew how to set up this kind of barrier. How could it be? Even she, who had reached heaven rank level 1, could not set up this kind of barrier. Wasn't this human girl Earth rank level 9? How could it be? She subconsciously looked at Ningxuema and her heart turned cold again. Ningxuema had already stood up and was looking at her. Lizine had never seen such cold and dark eyes in her life. It seemed like there was 1,000-year-old ice hidden in those eyes. When she looked at her, she felt the coldness penetrating her bones. Lizine's legs turned to jelly. Her intuition told her to run immediately. She had to run immediately. She immediately turned around and flew to the side. There was no barrier there, so she could go there. Bang! She bumped into it again. Looking up, the barrier had completely opened up in the air. It was like an eggshell surrounding her in the middle. It was gathering towards her from all directions. Her face was pale, but her brain was still very active. Since there was no way out in all directions, she would use the earth burrowing technique. Although she was not proficient in using the earth burrowing technique and it was a little ugly when she used it, she would get dirt all over her body. It did not match her beautiful image. But in order to save her life, she could only do this. She made up her mind and chanted the earth burrowing technique. She plunged into the ground not far away from her. Pooh! With a sound, her body indeed plunged into the ground. This was a hillside after all. There were rocks everywhere. She was not proficient in this technique, so it was inevitable that her face was scratched by the rocks. She did not know where her body was burning with pain, she did not care about these. After burrowing into the ground, she immediately began to rush forward, bang. She did not know what her forehead had bumped into. She groaned and looked up. There was a huge black tree root in front of her. She was using the earth technique. The tree root was made of wood, and would restrain earth. It immediately blocked her path. Her expression changed. She had been on the ground for a long time, so she was naturally clear about the surrounding environment. There was no tree with such thick roots at this distance. In other words, this was Ningxuema's doing. She turned around and flew back. Similarly, a huge tree root appeared in front of her to block her path. She became more and more flustered and changed directions several times, but she was blocked by the sudden appearance of huge tree roots. A moment later, her surroundings were completely covered by the roots. There was not a single gap. Not a single strand of her hair could escape. Her burrowing technique could not last for long. After a few rounds, she was already feeling short of breath. Coupled with the frequent collisions, she felt dizzy. No, if she didn't go up now, she would suffocate to death here. She disregarded everything and rushed upwards. But when she was about to reach the ground above her head was suddenly filled with tree roots. At this time, she was really afraid. She opened her mouth and wanted to shout. But when she was using the earth burrowing technique, she could not speak. She could not even open her mouth. Once she opened her mouth, a huge pile of soil and rocks would rush into her mouth. It was as if she was locked in an incomparably thick wooden coffin. And the coffin was filled with soil and rocks. This was obviously being buried alive. Chapter 1473. Lucienne was scared out of her wits. She did not expect Ningxiuemo, a mere human, to be so powerful. She had miscalculated. She had really miscalculated. Although she knew that she would have to face Ningxiuemo's crazy revenge after she got out, she had to go out now. She took out her sword and slashed at the roots with all her might. The roots around her were as hard as iron. She could not use her psychokinesis underground, so after failing to cut the roots around her, she turned to cut the dense roots above her head. She felt dizzy from holding her breath, but she realized in despair that the roots above her head looked weak, but they were extremely tough. She cut layer after layer. Although the earth escape technique allowed her to walk underground, there was a limit to how deep she could go. She could not go any further than that. Especially since this was a rocky slope, there were many big rocks below. She could not go any further. Now, there was no way out. She was losing more and more strength, and her fingernails were curled up and bloody from desperately tearing at the roots. She was going to die. She was going to be buried alive here. She was engulfed in despair. Her vision turned black. She had already reached heaven rank level 1. She did not need to breathe anymore. She could use her psychokinesis to convert the substances in the air into breathable substances to survive. However, she could not do it here. She tried her best to convert her psychokinesis, but she could not do it. She held her breath until her eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Her vision became darker and darker. Finally, she lost all her strength and was about to faint. Her body twitched unconsciously. Just when she thought she was going to die and her soul left her body, she felt a sharp pain in her back. A wooden splinter pierced into her back and she let out a hoarse scream. Her entire body was suddenly pulled out by the wooden splinter. Puff! She crawled out from the ground and fell to the ground like a dead fish. The sudden light and air made her open her mouth wide, but she could not breathe for a moment. She still had a mouth full of dirt and mud. She coughed violently and finally spat out the dirt and mud. A large amount of air rushed into her lungs. She breathed greedily, ignoring the piercing pain in her back. When she finally managed to catch her breath and opened her eyes again, her body trembled and her pupils suddenly shrank. Ningxiuemo was standing in front of her, looking down at her from above. That gaze was too cold, and unfathomable. It seemed to freeze all the blood vessels in her body. Spare me. Lucienne was so scared that her heart curled up. She didn't care about anything else and knelt down. Spare me, I didn't do it on purpose. There's no antidote for this kind of poison, so I just gave you a random healing medicine. I didn't have a choice. Before she could finish her messy explanation, her mouth suddenly felt like it was being held by an invisible hand. Her chin was almost crushed. She opened her mouth subconsciously. A red light flashed in Ningxiuemo's hand. Luzine let out an agonizing cry and her tongue flew out of her mouth, disappearing into nothingness in the air. Luzine, I've said that you'll pay the price for killing my child. Ning Xuema's eyes were bloodshot, and her long hair was flying wildly. She stood there with blood all over her body. She looked like an Azura from hell. Now, it's time for you to pay the price. She slowly reached out her hand and touched Luzine's eyelids with her fingertips. Chapter 1474. She slowly stretched out her hand and touched Luzine's eyelids with her fingertips. Her fingertips were cold, and Luzine was so scared that her lips started to tremble. She tried her best to move back and say no, but she did not have a tongue. No. Under Ning Xuema's gaze, she was like a little chick being stared at by an eagle. Her body was stiff and trembling so hard that she could not even dodge. Are these eyes used to harm people? Ning Xuema whispered. Her voice was equally cold. Then don't keep them. She moved her finger. Luzine let out a beast-like cry, and her eyes disappeared. Blood spurted out and sprayed onto Ning Xuema's body. The air was filled with the smell of blood. Luzine was in so much pain that she fell to the ground and rolled around. She was wrong. She was wrong. She should not have provoked this human woman. She probably couldn't keep this body anymore. She had to think of another way to escape. Otherwise, this crazy human woman might just destroy her soul. She tried her best to use spells to free her soul, but Ning Xuema seemed to have guessed her intentions. With a wave of her hand, a peachwood sword pierced Luzine's chest. Blood spurted out again. Ning Xuema did not dodge, and the blood splashed onto her body. The blood of her enemy allowed her to feel the warmth of this world. It allowed her to know that her blood was still boiling. Baby, the road to the netherworld is cold. Wait for Mommy. Mommy will accompany you after killing your enemy. Don't be afraid. Her sword pierced her immortal meridian, so Luzine could no longer escape from her body. This woman was crazy. Luzine was panicking. She shouted in deep language, Ning Xuema, you can't kill me. He won't let you go. He will do the same to you. Her voice was sharp and ear-piercing, almost piercing through the clouds. Ning Xuema ignored her and stabbed her sword again. Luzine groaned again. She was stabbed in her abdomen, and she could no longer speak in deep language. Luzine's body trembled like a leaf in the wind. A strange sound came from her throat, like the screeching of a bird. Ning Xuema looked down at her and a boning knife slowly appeared in her hand. Luzine, I'm not afraid of anyone's revenge. If you provoke me, you'll have to pay the price. A look of disgust appeared in her eyes. Although the miserable state of her enemy eased the pain in her heart, her treasure was still lost. So what if she cut Luzine into 1,000 pieces? Her baby wouldn't come back either. The treasure was the only thing that kept her alive. Now, her last hope had been cruelly taken away by someone else. The heavens had completely destroyed her. She suddenly raised her head and laughed. Luzine, since you've provoked me, I'll let you have a taste of the 18 levels of hell. I'll peel off your fox skin and pluck out your fox tendons. Although Luzine was blind, she wasn't deaf. When she heard Ning Xuema's threat, her body trembled even more violently. She forced herself to speak in deep language, just kill me. Her abdomen was pierced, and her deep language was in a mess. It was so vague that it was almost impossible to hear clearly. Ning Xuema didn't say anything, but her eyes were dead. She couldn't be bothered to torture Luzine anymore. The bony knife in her hand flashed and she stabbed it towards Luzine's heart. Chee! A white light suddenly flashed down from the sky. It directly hit Ning Xuema's wrist that was holding the knife. Ning Xuema's wrist trembled, and the boning knife fell to the ground. Chapter 1475. That white light was very familiar. That white light used to be the warmth in the depths of her heart. Many times when she was in danger, it was this white light that appeared in time to save her. Every time she saw this white light, her heart would beat faster. It was both sweet and sour. Now, she saw this white light again. However, this white light was targeting her. It wanted to save the woman lying on the ground. Ning Xuema did not raise her head. The moment her bone-paring knife fell to the ground, another steel knife appeared in her hand. She stabbed it at Lizine without caring about anything else. This woman must be buried with her baby. No one could stop her. Stop! An angry shout came from the sky. That person seemed to be really angry. Another white light was shot over. This time, he did not show any mercy. With lightning speed and terrifying strength, this white light hit Ning Xuema's stomach. Not only did it send her knife flying, but it also sent her flying like a kite with a broken string. Bam! Her body hit a big tree. The tree shook as if there was an earthquake. Ning Xuema spat out blood. Her body slid down the tree and fell to the ground. Her eyes were a little blurry, and she saw stars. Her stomach hurt. The child was no longer there. Before she tortured Lizine, the child had already disappeared from her stomach. When it fell out, it was the size of a pigeon egg. It was so small that its head and limbs could be separated. It just lay in her palm without moving. It would never kick her palm in her stomach again. It would never use its small palm to mischievously slide across her stomach to prove its existence. He would no longer use his little butt to make her happy when she was sad. She was a miracle doctor, but she could not protect her child no matter how hard she tried. It was such a small ball of meat, but it had brought her so much hope. It was the only thing that kept her going. From the moment the child fell out, from the moment she could no longer make that lump of flesh move no matter what she did, her heart had completely died. All that was left was bone-deep hatred and bone-deep madness. At that moment, she only wanted to cut Lizine into pieces. And that was exactly what she did. She just did not expect him to appear in time to save that woman. How timely! If he had come one step later, she would have given that woman a quick death. Right now, her only regret was that she hadn't been able to end that woman earlier. So much so that she no longer had the chance. With a god like him protecting her, how could she have a chance? There was no chance. Her abdomen was in so much pain that it was scratching her heart and liver. It had always been in pain and had never stopped. Being slapped by him was just more pain on top of the pain. The extreme pain was numbness. Now, even her heart was numb from the pain. So what if her body was hit again? He didn't care anymore. She didn't care. Her vision darkened slightly, and a person came in front of her. The corner of his fluttering white robe touched her cheek. Shui Emo, how can you be so vicious? That person opened his mouth, his voice icy cold, as if carrying the air of winter. Ning Xuema raised her head in disgust, avoiding the corner of his robe that floated over unintentionally. She slowly got up. Her whole body was in pain, but she didn't seem to feel any more pain. Her feet seemed to be stepping on empty air, unable to find solid ground. Her whole body was bathed in blood, but her back was straight. Her gaze finally landed on his face. She looked at the man she had loved for 2 lifetimes, at the man who stood up for another woman and taught her a lesson. Chapter 1476. He was no longer the person who loved her so much. He was no longer the great god who spoiled her to the bone. He was no longer the person she relied on when she was at her most desperate. Everything had changed since that time on Luoyne Cliff when he kissed her forehead and asked her to wait for him obediently. He had completely forgotten everything about her. She was the only one who still held on to that memory, unable to throw it away. It had changed, everything had changed. He was now Lizine's support, Lizine's fiancé. He had come to stand up for Lizine, vicious. Yes, in his eyes in this life, she had always been vicious. Her head rumbled. The extreme pain and despair made her blood rush to the top of her head. She suddenly laughed, her laughter sharp, yes, I've always been vicious. Shinjuli, this isn't the first day you know. Shinjuli's face was ashen. She was covered in blood from head to toe. Even her hair was dripping with blood. She looked like she had been fished out of a pool of blood. Only her small face was deathly pale. Her lips were stained with blood. He didn't know if it was hers or Lizine's. Her current appearance was like a thorn in his eye. It also made him even angrier. Although she was covered in blood, her clothes weren't torn at all. Clearly, this blood was splashed on her when she was torturing Lizine. Her cruel methods made people's hair stand on end. She was even more vicious than the demons in the demon world. He suddenly looked away. His fingers clenched in his sleeves. He said in a low voice, Shui Emo, don't force me to kill you. Kill her. You think I'm afraid? Ning Shuemo looked up to the sky and laughed, as if she was laughing at him for telling a joke. She didn't say anything to him. Instead, she suddenly flashed. A red dagger flew out, stabbing towards Lizine who was not far away. She was crazy. She dared to do this in front of him. Shinjuli rolled up his sleeves. The wind from his sleeves turned the dagger into powder on the spot. He raised his hand and pressed Ning Shuemo against a nearby tree. His eyes were bone-chilling. Ning Shuemo, do you really think I won't kill you? He directly lifted her up, and there was a white light in his palm that was about to spit it out. She had killed the people around him again and again. Her methods were cruel and she showed no remorse. She said she was Ning Shuemo, not Shui Emo, but her methods were even worse than Shui Emo's. He had indulged her too much. Did he really think that he was a fake god? His body gave off a chilling aura. He was still wearing a mask, and the black eyes behind the mask were filled with killing intent. Ning Shuemo's body was still dripping with blood. She was also looking at him, staring at him as if this was the first day she knew him, the first day she knew him as a person. The look in her eyes was frighteningly unfamiliar. Such a gaze made Shinjuli feel a chill in his heart. Shinjuli, I hate you, she spat out word by word, her eyes filled with hatred. Shinjuli's hand froze. What? What right do you have to hate me? She hated him. Why should she hate him? Between the two of them, he was clearly the one who had been schemed against. What right did she have to hate him? Ning Shuemo no longer looked at him. She laughed louder and louder. She laughed so hard that she almost couldn't breathe. She laughed so hard that she suddenly opened her mouth and spat out another mouthful of blood, which landed on Shinjuli's lapel. The blood was bright red and carried a fishy sweet smell. It was like the winter sweet blooming on his snow-white lapel. It was a dazzling red. Shinjuli's hand trembled and suddenly let go. Ning Shuemo slid down and fell to the ground. Chapter 1477. Shui Emo, this seat will let you off this once. You're on your own. He didn't look at her anymore. Turning around, he waved his hand towards Lizine. A ball of white light flashed, and Lizine on the ground revealed her original form. A originally snow-white nine-tailed fox, but now its fur was dirty, most of it dyed red with blood. Its originally watery eyes were left with two bloody holes, and most of its tongue was missing. Its 4 limbs were broken, and there were several bone-deep wounds on its body. Flesh lacerated. Truly flesh lacerated. It was paralyzed there, its body trembling non-stop. Shinjoli frowned. Raising his sleeve, a white light shot out, enveloping the fox in a barrier. Then, he turned around and left with it. He had to treat it immediately, or else it would really be crippled. It was implicated by him, and also came to pick herbs for him. Now that it was tortured to this state, he couldn't absolve himself of the blame. He didn't want to look at Ning Xuemo anymore, in case he couldn't control his anger and really killed her. He flew up, and behind him came Ning Xuemo's faint whisper, like a curse, "Shinjoli, you'll regret it." Shinjoli's feet paused slightly. Just as he was about to turn around, he saw a red figure flying in this direction from the corner of his eye, a Shuailan. He still appeared in the end. Shinjoli didn't want to be entangled with him at this time. Without any hesitation, a white light flashed, and he disappeared in the air. The surroundings regained its tranquility. On the ground, there were broken trees, rolling boulders, and dripping blood. The wind blew, blowing Ning Xuemo's messy hair. There was still the smell of blood in the air. Ning Xuemo sat with her back against the big tree, not getting up. She was too lazy to use her psychokinesis to control it. Blood gushed out from between her legs again, stream after stream, as if it was endless. Through her blood-stained skirt, it formed a small blood puddle on the ground, and that blood puddle was rapidly expanding. She looked up at the sky, towards the depths of the white clouds. "Baby, I'm sorry. Mommy is useless. I didn't get revenge for you. Mommy is coming to accompany you. It's lonely on the road to the netherworld. Let's keep each other company." When Shuailan arrived, he saw this scene. Ning Xuemo was lying on the ground, covered in blood. Her eyes were staring blankly at the sky, motionless. "Momo." Shuailan's legs almost went soft. He was stunned for a moment before he rushed over and hugged her in his arms. "Momo, which bastard hurt you?" Ning Xuemo stared blankly at the sky. She didn't seem to see him, nor did she struggle. Her entire body seemed to have fallen into a void world, and she was no longer able to sense anything that was happening outside. "Momo." Shuailan could feel that her body was gradually turning cold, and her face was getting paler and paler. Under the sunlight, her lips were so pale that they were almost transparent. It was as if the slightest touch would shatter her entire body. Shuailan's heart was beating wildly. This was the first time he saw her in such a dispirited and desperate state. Although she was still alive, she seemed to have lost all her vitality. Her whole body was covered in blood, but her skirt was not torn. He couldn't see any wounds either. Where exactly was she bleeding? Shuailan was determined to check her injuries, but when he reached out his hand, he seemed to have thought of something and paused. His Momo didn't like him touching her body. Because of this, she had fought with him several times. He froze for a moment before he finally asked, "Momo, where are you hurt?" I'll stop the bleeding first." She couldn't let it continue like this. She would bleed to death. Chapter 1478. Ning Xuemo acted as if she didn't hear his question. Although her eyes were wide open, they didn't reflect any light. They were as dead as a black hole. Shuailan was frightened by her expression. He had seen Ning Xuemo disappear into the black hole when he was in the outer space. He tried his best to find the black hole, but he could not find it no matter how hard he tried. Like a headless fly, he passed through one space door after another. In the end, he lost his way and could not find his way home. Passing through the space door required a sufficient amount of psychokinesis. He tried his best not to consume too much psychokinesis. In order to find Ning Xuemo, he could only find a place to rest when he was at the end of his tether. After a while, his body could not take it anymore. He fell seriously ill on a foreign planet. Unfortunately, the planet was full of primitive people. There was almost no civilization. Naturally, there were no herbs to cure his illness. Moreover, the environment there was very bad. He could not absorb enough spiritual energy. This illness almost took his life. If he did not have a protective barrier around him, the primitive people and wild beasts on the planet would have eaten him. This illness trapped him on the planet for 8 years. If he used his sorcery to suck the blood and souls of the primitive people, he might be able to recover faster. However, when he caught the primitive people and was about to use his sorcery, he suddenly remembered Ning Xuemo. She seemed to hate killing. In the end, he released the primitive people and relied on cultivation to recover bit by bit. After his body recovered more than half, he could not wait to leave the planet. After another round of searching, he finally found the door to this space door 2 years later and came back. He still had a tiny hope in his heart. He wanted to see if Ning Xuemo had come back. After asking around, he heard that Ning Xuemo danced as a gift during the engagement ceremony of the Sun-Moon Sex Dizun. He was happy but worried at the same time. He immediately began to search for Ning Xuemo's whereabouts. After many twists and turns, he finally found her. He finally saw her after 10 years. She was bathed in blood. She was dying. No matter what he asked her, it was as if she couldn't hear a thing. She was like a lifeless porcelain doll, and even her eyelashes were transparent. He held her in his arms, and she was as light as a leaf that could break at any moment. The blood on her dress dripped down along the corner of her clothes, almost forming a line of blood. She was still bleeding. Shuailan was so anxious that cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He was about to risk being cut by her in the future to check her body. Suddenly, he realized that Ning Xuemo was staring straight at him. His heart skipped a beat. "Momo, did you see me? Where are you bleeding? Let me stop the bleeding first." "The child is gone," she murmured. She seemed to be sober and confused at the same time. "I couldn't avenge it. I'm useless." Shuailan felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He almost threw Ning Xuemo to the ground. Child. She had a child. She was bleeding because of a miscarriage. Shuailan lowered his head to look at her. His eyes were filled with complicated emotions. Ning Xuemo, who was in his arms, suddenly moved slightly. She raised one of her hands as if she wanted to touch something. A smile appeared on her face. "Baby, you're here to pick up Mommy. Mommy will go with you." Her words came to an abrupt end. Her eyes slowly closed, and her hand fell limply to her side. Shuailan's mind was blown. His fingers trembled as he touched her wrist. Then, his expression changed drastically. He flew up with her in his arms. "Momo, don't be afraid. I'll save you. I won't let you die. It's okay. Don't be afraid." Chapter 1479. Luzine's injuries were extremely severe. After Shinjioli transformed her into a fox, he lifted his finger to stop her bleeding. Its eyeballs had been dug out while it was still alive, and its eyeballs had been completely destroyed by Ning Xuemo. It was in so much pain that it kept trembling. Within the protective barrier that he had set up for it, it was in a daze and had no intention of waking up. Its injuries were too severe. Even within the healing barrier that he had set up for it, it was still getting weaker and weaker. Its flower of life was like a candle in the wind, about to be extinguished at any time. He couldn't delay any longer. He couldn't delay a single second. As for how it had met Ning Xuemo and why they had fought, he would investigate these reasons in the future. But right now, saving people was more important. He had to save them first. After Shinjuli returned, he started to treat its injuries. Chest, stomach, eyes, mouth, limbs, there were penetrating wounds everywhere, and many of its organs were failing. It could be seen how ruthless the person who had done this was. Fortunately, it was a nine-tailed fox that had already cultivated to the heaven tier. Otherwise, these injuries would have already taken its life. Shinjuli looked at the wounds on its body, and his fingers stiffened. It wasn't that he had never seen people kill people, but it was really rare to see people kill people to such an extent. This was simply a type of cruel torture. In the end, what kind of conflict did Ning Xuemo have with it for her to be so ruthless? It was as if they were mortal enemies. Ning Xuemo's eyes, which were filled with hatred, flashed before his eyes, and his heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. Ning Xuemo's nature wasn't very kind, and he had long known about this. All these years, he had been investigating her both openly and secretly. Although it was a secret that Ning Xuemo had used underhanded methods to skin Tui Dao alive, with the help of the Sun-Moon sect's vast intelligence network, Shinjuli still found out about it. Of course, he knew that she had done it to protect herself, and Tui Dao was indeed not a good person. He didn't feel pity for Tui Dao at all. However, it was indeed shocking that a young girl like her could do such a thing. From this incident, it could be seen that she could be ruthless when necessary. After all, he was once the successor of the fiend ancestor. Being vicious and merciless was also a means of survival. Everything he knew about Ning Xuemo was negative, so when he saw her brutally torturing Lizine, he was so angry that he didn't even think about why she was doing it. Now that he had calmed down, he began to have doubts. With Ning Xuemo's character, she wouldn't do such a thing to Lizine if she didn't have any enmity with her. His gaze fell on the unconscious nine-tailed fox in front of him. Or did Lizine provoke her? But if it was just an ordinary provocation, it wouldn't have provoked such a huge hatred. The image of Ning Xuemo flashed before his eyes again. She was covered in blood, and there was not a single spot on her body that was not covered in blood. She was smiling like a demon from hell, and she was even going to attack Lizine in front of him. His heart suddenly began to race. Did Lizine do something irreversible to Ning Xuemo? Was that why, if he wanted to know the truth, he only needed to read Lizine's memory to know everything? However, the person needed to be awake to read the memory, and Lizine was now unconscious and dying. Woo! The nine-tailed fox unconsciously let out a painful groan, and her body began to tremble again. He actually got distracted when Lizine was about to die. Shinjuli finally regained his senses, and his eyes darkened. Chapter 1480. He had to save it first. When it woke up, he would read its memories. He forced himself to calm down and began to heal Lizine. Time passed slowly. By the time he finished healing it, 4 hours had already passed. All the wounds on its body had stopped bleeding and the places that needed to be stitched up had been stitched up. After a few months of rest, it should be able to fully recover. However, its tongue and eyes could not be healed. He had to leave it as it was and find a replacement in the future. This was the most difficult time for him to control his emotions when he was healing someone. While he was treating Lizine's injuries, Ning Xuemo's eyes, which were filled with hatred, flashed in front of his eyes. This made him restless. Ever since he met her again, he had not been able to calm down. Oh whoa! The nine-tailed fox that was enveloped by his white light moaned in pain. Its white fur trembled even more. Shinjuli looked down at it. He had raised many pets in his life and many of them were injured. Thus, he was quite familiar with healing them. He had always been a clean person. Whether it was healing animals or humans, he would try his best to avoid physical contact with the other party. This was especially true when it came to females who had cultivated their human forms. Except for that fox from 3,000 years ago, that fox loved to cling to him regardless of whether it was in its human form or its fox form. At first, he resisted, but later on, he got used to it. I can't think about her anymore. Shinjioli suppressed his chaotic thoughts and focused on healing Lizine. After he was done, Lizine was still in a semi-conscious state. He could not read its memories right away. He stood there for a moment and then walked out. The scenery outside was still the same. Apart from his main hall, there were no other halls on the Tianyin Peak. He looked at where the side hall used to be. After 10 years, not a single trace of the side hall could be seen. In its place, there was a large field of herbs. The herbs in the field swayed with the breeze. There was a field of herbs that had bloomed with bright red flowers. The flowers were as red as the morning sun. Unconsciously, he walked over and touched the flowers. In a trance, the flowers seemed to have turned into Ning Xuema's bloody clothes. Shinjioli, I hate you. His hand trembled, and he took a step back. The flower was still the flower, not that person. Ning Xuema's figure followed him like a shadow, appearing and disappearing from time to time. His heart inexplicably panicked and tightened. It was as if the most important thing in his life was rapidly leaving him. His gaze finally landed on his clothes. There was still a mouthful of blood that she had spat out. He was obsessed with cleanliness. Normally, he would never let a mouthful of blood get on his body, let alone let the blood stain stay on his body for so long. It was something that could be removed with a cleansing spell, but he didn't want to remove it. He stared blankly at the bloodstains for a moment and walked around the courtyard a few times. In the end, he summoned Yelu Jing and told him a location, asking him to quickly investigate the whereabouts of Ning Xuema and Shui Lan. Before he left, he saw Shui Lan appear. Without a doubt, they should be together now. Nothing would happen to her. The ancestor's order was extremely urgent. Yelu Jing and did not dare to delay and went to arrange it personally. Shinjioli walked around the same place again. The uneasiness in his heart grew stronger. The voice transmission talisman on his waist suddenly lit up. He picked it up and Yelu Jing and's voice came through urgently. Chapter 1481. Master, the spies in the capital of Chongkong Empire just sent news that Shui Lan was carrying a bloody lady and crazily begging for treatment. He has already smashed several medical centers. What? The cup in Shinjioli's hand slipped and fell to the ground, shattering into pieces. Who is he carrying? He heard his own voice wavering. Although he was 99% sure, he did not dare to believe it. I heard that it's junior sister. Shinjioli's fingers trembled. For Shui Lan to disregard his identity as a demon to appear and beg for treatment, her injuries must be very critical. How could it be? That's impossible. How could her injuries be so serious? Obviously, at that time, he saw Ning Xuema torturing Lizine like a demon from hell. Her methods were so cruel that it made one's hair stand on end. In a fit of rage, he slapped her away. He knew that his slap was a little heavy, but he knew his limits. It should be within the range that she could endure. At most, it would only make her spit out a few mouthfuls of blood. It would not endanger her life. Her body was stained with Lizine's blood, and there were no other wounds on her body. Furthermore, she was full of energy when torturing people, so her body should be fine. How could it be? Did any of the doctors that he found survive? What did they say? Shinjioli suppressed the panic in his heart and asked in a low voice. The spies there have already asked. They all said that the lady is like a lamp that has run out of oil. They can't save her. Shinjioli's voice transmission talisman fell to the ground. Master, master. I also heard some news. I don't know if it's true or not. Speak. The spies said that he had asked several doctors. 2 of them told him that the lady had a miscarriage and was bleeding profusely. Miscarriage. Bleeding profusely. These 5 words were like a series of thunderbolts, shocking Shinjoli so much that his face turned pale and he was almost speechless. She was pregnant. Pregnant? Who was it? His mind was buzzing and his mind was blank. His hands and feet were ice cold. No. Now is not the time to care about this. She had a miscarriage and was bleeding profusely. It can't be my palm strike, like a lamp that has run out of oil. There is no way to save the desperate situation. Ning Xuemo, was she going to die? Master. Disciple has also heard that Shuilan has caused such a huge commotion that it has already alerted the other immortal cultivation sects. Many of the immortal cultivation sects experts are already on their way there. Master. The sound transmission talisman on the ground transmitted Yelu Jing An's report, but no one was listening anymore. The wind blew and the talisman drifted into the distance, and then slowly burned to ashes. For the first time, Shinjoli's hands and feet began to move before his brain. By the time he regained his senses, he had already left the Sun-Moon sect. He hurriedly used the earth-shrinking technique and rushed towards the vast Sky Empire's capital at lightning speed. Ning Xuemo, no matter what, nothing can happen to you. No matter what, I don't want you to die. Shuilan was about to go crazy. He had never hated himself for not being a doctor as much as he did today. He could still deal with ordinary injuries, but a miscarriage and bleeding profusely, he really didn't have any experience at all. He didn't even know where to touch her to stop this damned bleeding. He could only find a doctor nearby. Find a midwife. Therefore, he boldly carried Ning Xuemo, who was covered in blood, and barged into the vast Sky Empire's capital, Fenglai City. This name was changed by Ji Yunhao after he ascended the throne. No one knew what it meant, but it was true that the people were still living and working in peace and contentment. Chapter 1482. Shuilan usually went into the city in stealth mode, but this time, he couldn't care less. He didn't go through the city gate. Instead, he carried Ning Xuemo, who was covered in blood, and descended from the sky. After all, he had been in the city before. Naturally, he knew where the medical centers were and which medical centers had better doctors. Therefore, he directly landed in the courtyard of the medical center. Unfortunately, the doctor in the medical center was more upright. No matter what patient he treated, he had to register and line up. This was the foot of the Son of Heaven, so the people here were very knowledgeable. They had also seen cultivators who could fly. Therefore, when Shuilan carried Ning Xuemo, who was covered in blood, and landed, they were very surprised, but they didn't panic. It was obvious that he had brought someone to see a doctor. Among the people in the line, there was a bold person who saw Shuilan running directly into the room where the doctor was. He was very angry. Hey, line up, line up. You're not allowed to cut the line. In Shuilan's dictionary, he didn't know how to write the word line up. He didn't have time to pay attention to those people. He directly kicked open the door of the room, grabbed the doctor inside, and asked him to treat Ning Xuemo. The doctor was pulled so hard that he almost fell on top of Ning Xuemo, who was covered in blood. He also had a stubborn temper. He straightened his neck and angrily rebuked Shuilan's bandit behavior. He also said that he would only treat the people in the line. Even if the emperor came, he would have to follow his rules. Shuilan was furious. Naturally, he threatened him. However, the old man would rather die than break the rules. Shuilan flew into a rage. However, He didn't have any other way to deal with this kind of old man who could be killed but not humiliated. Naturally, he could use other methods to force the old man to submit. For example, he could use his bloody and thunderous methods to kill the old man's family and all the patients in the hospital. However, if Momo knew about it, she might not be happy. Moreover, it would take time to kill. What's more, he wasn't sure if the old man would be threatened by him. Helplessly, he suddenly knelt down in front of the old man. Illnesses have their priorities, and she really can't be delayed for even a moment. I beg you, please save her. That old man was amenable to coaxing but not coercion. In fact, he had already seen Ning Xuemo and knew that her life was indeed at stake, so she could not be delayed. Shui Lan's kneeling gave him a way out, so he raised his head and agreed. She immediately went to see Ning Xuemo. Shui Lan stood up and slowly loosened his fingers that had formed a seal. This old man didn't know that he had actually managed to keep his life. Just now, if he had hesitated for even a moment, he would have been slapped by Shui Lan, this great devil, to the point where he was even more miserable than Ning Xuemo. The old man took Ning Xuemo's pulse for a while and shook his head. Shui Lan stared at him. What do you think? Can she be saved? Madame Gui is a case of miscarriage and hemorrhage. This case is extremely dangerous. 9 out of 10 people die. Madame Gui has already lost a lot of blood. Her blood supply is insufficient, and her own blood is unstable. The old man shook his head and said professional terms. Shui Lan was anxious. He grabbed the old man's collar and said, "Speak human language. Can she be saved or not?" The old man's face and neck turned red. You're such a boorish man. How dare you threaten a doctor like this? Shui Lan's hands that were hidden in his sleeves loosened and clenched. He clenched and loosened again. It was the first time in his life that he had begged someone so humbly. It was the first time he had been so sullen. I really care about her. Can she be saved? Chapter 1483. For the sake of the patient, the old man decided not to argue with him, but he also explained, she is close to the end of her life. I don't know if I can cure her, but I can only try my best. As long as I can stop the bleeding first, I will be halfway to success. Shui Lan naturally agreed and urged him to do it quickly. Ning Xuemo's bleeding made him frightened. He had no way to cure her, so he could only place his hopes on these human doctors. It turned out that with Ning Xuemo's physique, the human doctors could not be trusted. The old man used his special skills, but there was still no sign of stopping the bleeding. Her face had already turned pale yellow, and she still hadn't opened her eyes. Shui Lan did not know how much psychokinesis Shui Lan had instilled into her, but she did not move again. In the end, the old man shook his head and simply gave Shui Lan an honest advice: don't worry about it. Prepare for her funeral. Shui Lan did not say anything. He did not want to waste any time, so he picked up Ning Xuemo and left. The bold man who was angry at Shui Lan for cutting the queue sneered at the side. Who told you to cut the queue? Retribution. He wanted to say a few more words to vent his anger, but he could not say the rest of the words. Because Shui Lan didn't even turn his head and flung his sleeves backwards, that person flew out like a rag bag. With a bang, he smashed through the roof of the clinic, causing chaos. But the chaos was far more than that. Shui Lan also wouldn't give up after seeing just one doctor. He continued to rush into a few more, causing chaos in each of the medical centers. As time went by, he became more and more irritable. Several doctors and patients were directly slapped to the wall by him, almost becoming photos that were hung on the wall. This was still because he had scruples in his heart. Otherwise, none of these people would have survived. He did not know who had seen him 20 years ago. When he was asking for treatment, he trembled and shouted, "Zither demon in red. He's the red-clothed zither demon." A single stone stirred up 1,000 wolves. The people of this capital city still had a deep impression of the red-clothed zither demon who had stirred up a storm in the city back then. And so, word spread from 1 to 10, from 10 to 100, from 100 to 1,000. The entire Phonlai city knew about it. Naturally, it also alarmed the imperial palace. The government immediately deployed soldiers and generals to strengthen the guards in the palace. The Minister of Supreme Court also sent out various spies to investigate Shui Lan's movements. This time, the spies didn't have to be too deliberate and immediately reported back. The red-clothed Guqin demon did not seem to have any evil intentions this time. He only wanted to seek medical treatment and cause trouble in various medical centers. He did not even wantonly kill people. Thus, the palace guards finally let out a sigh of relief and ordered them to pay close attention to the red-clothed zither demon's movements. The various sects and clans also had many spies stationed in the city. Naturally, they also noticed this abnormality. Right after Shui Lan left, the government officials and the informants of the various sects and clans entered the medical centers, all kinds of hustle and bustle. Shui Lan had only been in the capital city for 4 hours, but everyone in the various sects and clans already knew about him. Countless self-proclaimed righteous sects and clans mobilized their troops to take advantage of this opportunity to get rid of him. It was useless. It was all useless. He carried Ning Xuema and crazily kicked more than 10 medical centers. However, each time, he felt more and more despair. Ning Xuema, who was in his arms, was almost lifeless. She lay there limply, as if she had already died. The streets were still bustling with activity. The surrounding shops were connected to one another. Countless people were laughing and chatting among themselves. Shui Lan was still staggering along the streets. Chapter 1484. Shui Lan staggered along the street. In his arms, Ning Xuema's blood was still dripping. Drop by drop, the blood fell on the bluestone, as if red snowflakes were blooming. Perhaps the blood in her body was about to run out, but the speed of the blood flow had already slowed down a bit, following his footsteps to the ground. Her body was also getting colder and colder. She kept her eyes closed, never waking up. There seemed to be tears at the corners of her eyes, but they were already dried by the wind, leaving only a little trace. The corners of his lips were slightly hooked, as if he was smiling, a smile of relief. Perhaps the name of the red-clothed zither demon was too well known, but at this time, many shops had closed their doors. Many people also hid in various shops, but they also watched his figure from various hidden places as he walked past. Even if there were some passers-by who had to walk for one reason or another, they all stuck close to the wall, and then curiously watched him. It's useless. She's clearly a lamp that has run out of oil. There's no need to save her. This old man feels that if you carry her and run wildly, it's better to prepare a coffin for her. Young man, please restrain your grief. She should be a martial artist, right? If she was an ordinary person, she would have already died after losing so much blood. She's only left with her last breath, but she's just struggling at death's door. Forgive this one for being powerless. He had brought her to see all the doctors in the various medical centers, whether they were famous divine doctors or ordinary quacks, but none of them could give him any hope. None of them could wake her up. In this life, Shui Lan had always been the most powerful. Except for the devil ancestor and Shui Emo, he had never knelt to anyone else. But this time, in order to beg those people to save Ning Xuema, in order to fight for a bit of hope, he didn't know how many people he had knelt to. As long as there was one person who could save her, even if he had to kowtow 100 times to that person, it was fine. But, no one. No one could give him hope. Why was it like this? Why was it like this? His Momo had lived so miserably in her previous life and died so miserably. Could it be that she was going to walk the same path as her previous life in this life? If this was God's retribution to the devil, then Momo hadn't done many bad things. She had even saved many people. She had only repaid her debts, but she hadn't done anything truly evil. Why was God tormenting her like this? If this was retribution for the devil, then Shui Lan must have done more evil than her, right? Why didn't the damned heavens come for him? Why did she have to bully his Momo? A murderous and cold aura emanated from his body. The wind lifted the corners of his robe and made it flutter. He had even sought out the imperial physician who worked in the inner court of the imperial palace, but the result was still hopeless. He hugged her and could only watch as her body became colder and colder, and her breath became weaker and weaker. Momo, if something really happens to you this time, I'll bury everyone in this city with you. Shui Lan said fiercely. But his threatening words had no effect on the dying Ningxuemo. She didn't respond at all. Momo. Shui Lan's voice was filled with pain. What do you want me to do? Tell me, what do you want me to do? I don't want you to die. He blankly looked ahead. The street had already become very deserted, but he couldn't see any way out. His future was gloomy. Chapter 1485. Shui Lan, do you really want to save her? Perhaps we have a way. A group of people suddenly appeared and blocked his path. Shui Lan raised his head and looked at those people. It was a group of 8 people, and each one of them was astute and valiant. Although they were all ugly, each one of them was an expert. Shui Lan's eyes narrowed slightly. Although he didn't recognize them, he recognized their clothes. They were from the second largest cultivation sect in Jianghu, the Wind Clouds sect. There were many talented people in this sect, and some of them were extremely skilled in medicine. They were even famous in Jianghu. Perhaps they really had a way. Shui Lan's eyes flashed. He stared at them and repeated, "Do you really have a way?" His voice was slightly trembling. One of the short-bearded people immediately nodded. Perhaps. We have to see to know. Shui Lan's eyes lit up. He was like a drowning person grabbing onto a piece of driftwood, unwilling to let go no matter what. He raised his sleeve and a soft bed immediately appeared in front of him. He carefully placed Ningxuemo on it. Take a look. If you can save her, I can give you countless mountains of gold and silver. The short-bearded man slowly walked over and said with a smile, "We don't care about mountains of gold and silver, but we want you to do something. If you do it, I can try to save her. What is it?" The short-bearded man stared at him and said word by word, "Kowtow to us a few times on the street and shout that you, Shui Lan, will always listen to the orders of the Wind Clouds sect." Shui Lan stiffened. He raised his head and looked at him. His thin lips slightly pursed. "What? You don't want to? Then you can just watch her die." The short-bearded man sneered. Then he pulled his companion. "All right, we're leaving. Don't worry about him anymore. If he doesn't want the opportunity that was sent to him, then this girl should die. Others can't do anything about it, right?" His companions naturally echoed loudly and laughed. "I can kneel, but you have to promise to save her," Shui Lan said slowly. The short-bearded man and the others looked at each other. The short-bearded man laughed, "Okay, sure. Then kowtow to me 3 times as a deposit." These people obviously had ill intentions. They didn't think that a great demon like Shui Lan would kneel down in public. They just wanted to take the opportunity to humiliate him. Unexpectedly, Shui Lan's eyes deepened when he heard this. "Good. You must keep your word. He actually knelt down in front of the short-bearded man. The short-bearded man was stunned, his mouth slightly agape. He watched as Shui Lan knelt down and kowtowed, and a fierce look flashed through his eyes. He quickly made a few hand signals to the other brothers, and they immediately dispersed silently. When Shui Lan kowtowed for the second time, 7 of the 8 suddenly attacked him together. Another one pounced towards Ning Xuemo, who was on the soft bed. 7 different colored rays of light shot towards Shui Lan from different directions. These people were obviously used to working together. They didn't give Shui Lan any time to react. Moreover, they were all killing moves. The 7 rays of light shot down at the same time, enveloping Shui Lan's entire body. If there were people watching from the side, they wouldn't be able to see his body. Bang! After an earth-shattering sound, the 7 rays of light exploded with a brilliance that was even brighter than lightning. The 7 people were pleasantly surprised. They didn't see Shui Lan dodge. Chapter 1486. It should have hit. They even felt the weapon cut into their flesh. Aw! A long scream resounded through the street. When the light dissipated, there was indeed a corpse on the ground that had been chopped beyond recognition. The 7 people were pleasantly surprised at first, but when they saw the corpse's face, they all turned pale with fright. The corpse on the ground was not Shui Lan, but the person who had just pounced on Ning Xuemo, their companion. Shui Lan had already disappeared without a trace. Their expressions changed, and they suddenly raised their heads. They saw Shui Lan standing not far away, holding the dying woman in his arms, but his eyes were fixed in a certain direction. A person landed on the street, his black hair fluttering in the wind along with his white robe, and his silver mask flashed faintly under the sunlight. The 7 people naturally followed Shui Lan's gaze, and when they saw the white-robed person, their eyes lit up. Di Zun. It was actually Di Zun who had appeared here alone. They immediately knelt down and shouted, "We pay our respects to Di Zun." Before their knees touched the ground, a white light flashed across the ground, and their bodies flew out involuntarily. Then, they fell to the ground one after another. It was unknown whether it was a coincidence or Di Zun's punishment, but each of their knees touched the ground, a series of miserable cries sounded, and the 7 people's knees all shattered, and they fell to the ground, unable to stand up again. Di Zun. The 7 people opened their eyes wide, looking at the godlike man. Shinjiuli did not pay attention to them, and directly walked towards Shui Lan, stretching out his hand, "Give her to me." Shui Lan's expression changed, and he could not help but take a step back. Shinjiuli's gaze fell on Ning Xuemo's body, and his pupils shrank. He staggered a little. Ning Xuemo's bloody clothes were already half dry, and her face was pale yellow. Her eyes were slightly closed, and she was lying helplessly in Shui Lan's arms, almost unable to see the rise and fall of her chest. Ding! Another drop of blood fell from the corner of her clothes, and it fell beside Shui Lan's feet. There was no trace of life in her body, and her whole body was like a leaf blown away by the autumn wind. The leaf was withered and yellow, and there was no green. She was like a knife that stabbed into Shinjuli's chest. His heart felt like it was going to flip over at that moment. He actually hurt her so badly. How desperate must she have been when he left her, who was so heavily injured, with another woman. While he healed the other women, she was already on the verge of death. Even though he hated her and was determined to cut off all ties with her, he had never thought of taking her life. Xuemo. Xuemo. I'm sorry. He waved his sleeves, and with a flash of white light, Ning Xuemo, who was originally lying in Shui Lan's arms, was now in Shinjuli's arms. Originally, he just wanted to immediately heal her, but the moment she was in his arms, his heart felt like it was drowning, and he almost suffocated. It had been 10 years, and in these 10 years, he kept telling himself to give up, to stop thinking about her. But there were many sleepless nights where her figure flashed in front of his eyes. Many times in his dreams, he hugged her, but when he woke up, he was faced with a room full of loneliness. Unknowingly, she had become a demon in his heart that he could not get rid of, and unknowingly, she had become his poppy existence. Now that he held her in his arms again, the familiar feeling and desire overwhelmed him, and it was so familiar that it almost suffocated him. Chapter 1487. The moment he held her in his arms, he had the urge to crush her into his body and never let her leave. She was as light as a leaf floating in the wind. Her eyes were slightly closed and she didn't move at all. Her face was frighteningly pale and her eyelashes were almost transparent. Her once plump lips were dry and pale, without a trace of color. There were no external injuries on her body, but they were more serious than any external injuries. She lay lifelessly in his arms, pale, weak, and without any signs of life. Shoo-em-aw. Shinjuli's heart twitched as if countless needles had been stabbed into it, twisting it inch by inch. He would rather see her as vigorous and lively as she had been in the Heavenly Book Mountains. He did not want to see her so weak. Moreover, her weakness was all because of him. He held Ning Shuamaw's wrist and took her pulse with trembling fingers. She was like a lamp that had run out of oil. She was really like a lamp that had run out of oil. She had lost almost all the blood in her body. If she was a normal person, she would have died long ago. The only reason she was still alive was because she had a half-immortal body and her soul was strong. Her wrist was ice cold. That coldness seemed to be able to drill into Shinjuli's heart through his fingers. After he checked her pulse seriously, his expression changed slightly. Ning Shuamaw wasn't just suffering from postpartum hemorrhage. She had used some kind of forbidden technique before the hemorrhage. The image of Ning Shuamaw torturing Lizine like an Azura flashed before his eyes. His heart suddenly tightened. Lizine was someone who had just ascended to Heaven rank level 1, and Ning Shuamaw was Earth rank level 9. Logically speaking, Ning Shuamaw shouldn't be a match for Lizine. However, the scene he saw was that Ning Shuamaw had the absolute advantage and Lizine couldn't even retaliate. Shinjuli knew that Ning Shuamaw was extremely smart and had many tricks up her sleeves in battle. She could often defeat people who were stronger than her and beat them up until they cried for their parents. Even now, the Sun Moon sect still secretly spread the story of how she had slaughtered everyone when she had entered the sect, and how she had beaten up those who were several levels higher than her. Therefore, when he saw Ning Shuamaw using her absolute advantage to the point that Lizine couldn't retaliate, he didn't feel that this abnormal phenomenon was strange. Now, it seemed that she had used a forbidden technique to temporarily increase her power to achieve that effect. She used this forbidden technique at the cost of burning half of her blood essence. She was also pregnant. Logically speaking, even a little bit of blood essence was extremely precious and would not be wasted easily. Even if she was thinking about the baby in her womb, she shouldn't use such a method that would hurt both sides, unless the child in her womb was gone by then. That was why she was so crazy and reckless. He recalled the moment he saw Ning Shuamaw. She was covered in blood, and her dress was stained with blood. Her face was frighteningly pale, and her eyes seemed to be burning with fire. She even wanted to kill Lizine in front of him, as if she was her mortal enemy. Could it be that Lizine had already hurt the baby in her womb? When he arrived, she had already miscarried. More than half of the blood on her body was actually her own. Everyone would feel sorry for their child. If she had a miscarriage because of Lizine, then it wouldn't be strange for her to fight Lizine to the death. And what did he do? He slapped her when she just had a miscarriage. And it was on her lower abdomen. Shui Lan threw out a palm, bastard. Who told you to be such a hooligan at this time? He had been running around for half a day and had to endure everyone's supercilious looks. He had a stomach full of pent-up anger, and at this moment, he could no longer suppress it, so this palm strike was exceptionally powerful. A streak of red light shot toward Shinjuli's back like a bolt of lightning. Although he was angry, he still had a sense of propriety. Shinjuli was holding Ningshuamo, so he naturally could not attack in front of him. Therefore, he attacked from behind. Careful! Someone cried out in alarm. At this moment, Shinjuli seemed to be in a daze. He hugged Ningshuamo and kissed her passionately. Shuilan's red light hit his back. With a bang, everyone seemed to hear the sound of bones breaking. Shinjuli's face turned slightly pale, but his body did not move at all. His lips never left Ningshuamo's lips. Chapter 1489. Shuilan was simply speechless. He had seen rapists before, but he had never seen one who didn't care about his life. It was as if he wanted to kiss her even if she died. Wasn't this bastard already engaged to another woman? Why did he still want to take advantage of his Momo? Shuilan simply wanted to smash Shinjuli into pieces with one palm. However, that person was still the only hope to save Momo. Shuilan only felt a wave of anger rush to his head, but he couldn't find a place to vent it. In the blink of an eye, he saw the 7 people from the Storm sect. Those people were also shrewd people. They probably knew that if they continued to stay here, they wouldn't have a good ending. They were just about to roll and crawl away on their hands and feet. Shuilan's eyes suddenly narrowed. For the sake of Ningshuamo, he was willing to lower his voice to these people and didn't hesitate to kneel down and beg. However, these people wanted to take advantage of the situation to trick and plot against him. Did they really think that he, the Demon Emperor, was fake? Just now, when those people were plotting against him, his heart was actually on guard. The moment those people attacked him, he immediately used his demonic technique to quickly evade and directly threw himself at Ningshuamo, who was lying on the single bed. Helplessly, the 8th person also rushed to the side of the single bed. Just as his hands were about to grab Ningshuamo, a white light flashed and directly wrapped around the person and dragged him in the direction of the other 7 people. Thus, the 7 Wind Cloud sect's disciples killed their companions. Shuilan understood that the white light was released by Shinjuli. That strength and that timing were not ordinary. Shinjuli rarely killed people, but this time, his actions were not ordinary. Because everything had happened too quickly, those people didn't see clearly how their comrade had fallen under his sword. However, looking at the current situation, they had indeed angered the ancestor. Breaking their knees might just be the first punishment. When he was free and had time, he might give them a second punishment. Therefore, even if their legs were hurting unbearably, even if it was too embarrassing to escape in such a state, they couldn't care less. Just as they were about to escape, they heard Shuilan sneer, "You want to escape after toying with me?" 7 rays of red light shot out from his palms at the same time. They were exactly the same as the red light that had attacked Shinjuli. Each ray of red light chased after the middle of the back of a person. As a result, the 7 of them could only let out short screams as a bloody hole appeared in their backs. 7 people became 7 corpses. His move shocked the people who were watching from afar. Someone screamed and hurriedly got up and ran away. With one person running, it naturally led the others to run as well. Chapter 1490. Finally, Shinjuli let go of Ningshuamo's lips and raised his head. His face seemed to be much paler than before. His eyes were slightly lowered, and his eyelashes were delicate. There was a faint trace of blood on his lips. As for Ningshuamo's lips, which were originally like flower petals that had been beaten by the wind and rain, they were now a bit brighter. Her eyes were still closed, and she didn't move at all. She just obediently lay in his arms. "How is she?" Shuailan finally couldn't hold back and asked. Shinjiuli didn't answer him. He lowered his eyes and looked at her in his arms. He gently pressed a hand on her back and activated his divine telekinesis, circulating it in her body. He looked at her for a moment, paused, and then lowered his head again. Was there an end to this? Shuailan angrily said, "Shinjiuli, you don't have the ability to get close to her. Don't use healing to do something improper." Shinjiuli still ignored him. This time, his lips landed on Ning Xuema's Zhu Sha mole between her eyebrows. Shuailan. He felt like he had nowhere to vent his anger. How did it feel to watch the person he loved being kissed by a scum, but he couldn't separate them? Shuailan was so angry that he was about to explode. He clenched his fists and sneered, "Shinjiuli, what's the use of you acting like you're in love with her? Let me tell you, Momo's heart has already been broken by you. If you want to treat her, then treat her properly. If you want to kiss her, then go hug your fiancé and kiss her. Momo thinks you're dirty." Shinjiuli's mind was very strong. When he concentrated on something, the shouts of others were like the buzzing of mosquitoes to him. Now, all his energy was on Ning Xuema, who was in his arms, and he didn't hear Shuailan's shouts at all. His lips touched Ning Xuema's cinnabar mole. One of his hands was pressing on her back while the other hand was forming a spell. He was mumbling something, and a line of blood flowed from his lips into the space between Ning Xuema's eyebrows. After Shuailan finished yelling, he finally saw that the line of blood on Shinjiuli's lips was connected to Ning Xuema's forehead. The line of blood was not disappearing, and Ning Xuema's face became even redder. What kind of healing technique was this? Shuailan opened his eyes wide and stopped yelling. He looked at Ning Xuema and saw that her complexion was getting better inch by inch. It was like a withered leaf that was being injected with chlorophyll again. However, Shinjiuli's face was getting paler and paler. Finally, this strange healing technique stopped. Shinjiuli slowly got up with Ning Xuema in his arms. He didn't know if it was because he had been kneeling for too long or because of other reasons, but his body swayed slightly. "How is she?" Shuailan asked anxiously. "She's fine for now." This time, Shinjiuli finally opened his mouth. He was still hugging her, as if he couldn't bear to let go of her for even a moment. "For now." Shuailan raised his eyebrows. "Her soul is weak, and her blood and qi are unstable. She's in danger of bleeding out at any time. I need to use the bone marrow cleansing technique to reorganize her qi." It was rare for Shinjiuli to explain so much. Shuailan was confused. However, he didn't really understand. This kind of medical knowledge couldn't be learned in a short period of time. "How do I do it?" "I need an absolutely quiet room." "Okay, I'll go prepare it." Shuailan was straightforward. He turned around and disappeared. Shuailan made this quiet room absolutely clean and absolutely quiet. He had used his power to create this quiet room on a green hillside. Although Shuailan liked to kill, he was also quite artistic. The room he built had white walls and black tiles, and the windows were quaint and elegant. It was very artistic. Chapter 1491. When Shinjiuli saw this house, his feet paused for a moment. The style of this building was exactly the same as when Shuailan was living in seclusion with Ning Xuema in the Immortal Kingdom. It seemed like Shuailan had a special liking for this style of building. When Shuailan saw Shinjiuli holding Ning Xuema, his heart filled with anger. Even though he knew that this person was here to treat Ning Xuema's illness, when he thought about how he was already engaged to another woman, Shuailan felt aggrieved for Ning Xuema. He stretched out his hand with a straight face. Give her to me. Shinjioli paused for a moment. He held Ning Shuemo without any intention of letting go. He took in a light breath and said, "She can't leave my hand right now." His palm had been pressed against Ning Shuemo's back the entire time, as if he was transferring his spiritual force to her. Shui Lan gave a cold laugh. "I hope you're not trying to take advantage of her. She has nothing to do with you right now." Shinjioli did not say anything. "Shinjioli, even if you save her right now, she won't be grateful to you at all." "I know." Shinjioli's reply was short and simple. It was already good enough that she didn't stab him when she woke up, so why would she be grateful? Because saving her was more important, Shinjioli and Shuilan were too lazy to waste words and directly entered the room to save her. Because they needed absolute silence and no one could disturb them, Shuilan didn't wait for Shinjioli to speak and directly went out to be a guard. The method of changing one's marrow was incomparably complicated and there were countless steps. Moreover, it had to be done meticulously and there couldn't be a single mistake. This required the user to be completely focused and not be distracted at all. It was unknown if that bastard Shuilan did it on purpose or if he only knew how to design this kind of house. The layout of this quiet room was simply a copy of the bedroom Ning Shuema had when she was living in seclusion in the Immortal Empire. Shinjioli didn't know how long he had lingered outside that room and looked inside countless times, so he was naturally familiar with the layout inside. Now that he saw it again, his heart felt stuffy. 10 years did she and Shuilan spend in this kind of house? His gaze landed on the bed in the room. It was a rather spacious bed, big enough for 8 people to sleep on. The mattress on top was soft, and the top was a layer of red mattress. Embroidered on the mattress was a fox running in the wilderness. The little fox looked relatively young, with fluffy white fur and 8 tails swaying behind it. Shinjioli's eyes narrowed once again. This little fox's appearance was exactly the same as Shui Emo when they first met. Even the 8 tails were exactly the same. He looked at the little fox for a moment, then his gaze suddenly moved away. He was an omnipotent god. In his life, there were only things he didn't want and nothing he couldn't obtain. He thought that with his ability, even if the other party came with a certain goal, he could make her change halfway through. He didn't expect, back then, he thought that he could hold her hand for life, but he didn't expect that the two of them would become strangers now. She was now someone else's wife, and even hugging her was a luxury. He could only take advantage of this moment. Shuilan, that bastard. His wife was pregnant, but he let her run away alone. His gaze swept across the big bed again. Overturning clouds with one turn of the hand, turning red waves with one turn of the hand. He didn't know why, but when these words appeared in his mind, his arm froze. Had she and Shuilan spent these 10 years on this kind of bed, his chest suddenly felt stuffy. Shinjioli took a deep breath. He felt that he couldn't think about it anymore. Chapter 1492. If he continued to think about it, he might just tear down the house. Shuilan, this bastard, must have done it on purpose. He only said that he needed a quiet room, but he didn't say that he needed a well-equipped bedroom. Did he deliberately provoke him? The layout of the house made Shinjioli have the urge to run away. However, he couldn't find another quiet room. He paused for a moment and waved his sleeves. A layer of sparkling white light flashed, and the unsightly furniture in the room disappeared, especially the big bed, without a trace. There was a white jade bed and a few praying mats in the place. Since he wanted to save someone, he couldn't leave anything unsightly in the house. He didn't want to be distracted and make mistakes during the rescue, which would make him regret it for the rest of his life. Shuilan was sitting on a branch of a big tree outside the small courtyard. This place had a good angle of view. Not only could he see the inside of the small courtyard, he could also see the surrounding scenery. Even if a fly flew over, he would be able to see it and kill it in time. He felt that he was very attentive and thoughtful. The quiet room was decorated according to the style that Momo used to like. When she woke up and saw the familiar layout, she might feel less sad. He was most satisfied with the big bed. Currently, Ning Xuemo was still unconscious. To heal her injuries, she needed a comfortable place to lie down. She was injured so badly that Shinjiuli might have to circle around her body to save her. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to do that if the bed was too small. Therefore, he specially made a king-sized bed. He was afraid that the bedboard would be too hard for Momo, so he personally made a few layers of bedding. Shuailan stretched his waist on the branch. He had just returned to this world from outer space and encountered such a situation as soon as he came back. He wanted to save someone so badly that he couldn't calm down to think. Now that he had a little free time, he began to think about some things. The first thing that came to his mind was, which bastard caused Momo to have a miscarriage? Who was the father of the child in her belly? He had been separated from her for a full 10 years. When they met again, she was injured and almost unconscious. She only said, "Baby, mommy is coming to accompany you." Her words were like a bomb that shocked him so much that he was at a loss. Because he was in a hurry to save her, he didn't think too much about it. Now, he was puzzled. What had she experienced in the past 10 years? How in the world did she escape from that black hole of a whirlpool? Judging from Shinjiuli's reaction, he didn't seem to have much interaction with her in the past 10 years. He didn't even know about the existence of this child, so this child was most likely not his. Then whose child was it? Could it be that Momo met and fell in love with another man in these 10 years, so she had that man's child? But why did she bring someone else's child to Shinjiuli's engagement party? She even danced as a gift and smashed the pipa to sever everything. This was a bit like lingering feelings. Was the baby in her belly Shinjiuli's? But the timing didn't match. Could it be that Momo and Shinjiuli were entangled in this 1 year? But if they were entangled, it was impossible for Shinjiuli not to know that the child was his. He wasn't an idiot. It was too strange. It was too hard to understand. Shuailan felt that his brain was about to be tied up. He looked at the quiet house in the distance. There was no movement in the house. Even the curtains were closed, so he couldn't see anything inside. Chapter 1493. Before Shinjiuli went in, he had said that no matter what happened in the outside world, he was not to be disturbed. Therefore, although he had a question in his heart, he could not say it for the time being. He looked down at his hands. His fingers were slender and white. These hands had once held the military power of the demon realm. They could summon the wind and summon the rain. But no matter what he did, he could not win the heart of the woman he liked. Now, he did not know whether the woman he loved the most was alive or dead. But he could only sit here and wait hopelessly. The hourglass of time flowed in this anxiety. In the quiet room, Ning Xuemo's blood-stained clothes had already disappeared and were replaced by a red dress. The red dress was made from the best quality heavenly silkworm silk. Not only was it light and elegant, it also had the ability to defend against swords and sabers. This red dress was a treasure of the other world. Back then, the chivalrous and evil people in the other world fought to get this red dress. However, Shinjiuli took advantage of it. He liked this red dress very much, so he took it back and put it in the storage space. These years, he would often go through the various space doors and go to various other worlds. He would often see things that were suitable for girls. Occasionally, he would buy them on impulse. After buying them, he would feel annoyed and put them in a remote corner of his storage space. He thought that there would never be a day when this red dress would come in handy. He did not expect to use it now. She looked really good in this red dress that he got. But the size was slightly on the plump side. She was obviously pregnant, but her body was thinner than before. Her waist was so slender that it seemed like he could hold it with one hand. Her body was full of bloodstains. It was very eye-catching. Before he treated her, he had to clean her up. When he treated her as his wife, if he encountered such a situation, he would not hesitate to strip her naked and wash her thoroughly with rootless immortal water. But now, no. She was someone else's wife. Even if he could not forget her, he could not be rude at this time. Therefore, he could only continuously use the cleansing incantation on her. Using the cleansing incantation required psychokinesis, and because he had given Ningxiuema a third of her god blood, he was somewhat weak. He knew that if he continued to heal her, he would have to consume a small amount of psychokinesis. He truly felt that his incomparably boundless psychokinesis was somewhat insufficient. When he held her in his arms again, he realized that he still desperately desired her. He longed to the point that he had the impulse to kill Shuilan outside to prevent any future troubles. But, no. He had already hurt her badly enough. If he killed Shuilan as well, it was one thing for her to fight him with her life when she woke up, but he was afraid that she would be extremely sad. Therefore, even if Shuilan was an eyesore, he could not kill him. Perhaps in the future, he would have to send people to protect him, lest he be accidentally destroyed by those cultivation sects. Just thinking about it made him feel vexed. Therefore, Shinjuli simply stopped thinking about it. At this moment, she was lying on the white jade bed that he had prepared with her eyes closed. After he cleaned her up with the cleansing spell, he had already used a spell to put on the red dress for her. Her hair was winding under her body, and the red dress finally reflected a trace of redness on her pretty little face. Red dress, she looked the best in red. This dress looked like a wedding dress. She was lying on the white jade bed that he had prepared for her, just like his bride. Shinjuli took a slight breath and pushed this unreliable thought out of his mind. Her face was slightly pale and beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. However, she pursed her lips and did not make a sound. She did not even make a sound. Although her appearance was not enough to disturb the doctor's state of mind, it made Shinjuli's heart twist. He forced himself to calm down and began the last step. Once again, he pulled her hand over and placed his fingers against hers. He closed his eyes and activated his psychokinesis. Beads of blood appeared on all 10 of his fingers and seeped into her body through her fingers. Marrow cleansing meant that the two of them were connected by blood. The flow of his blood also joined the flow of her blood. It was equivalent to blood circulating between the two of them. Shinjuli's blood was the blood of God. It had the power to purify everything. Even if her blood was exhausted and decayed, it would be rejuvenated and regain its energy under the influence of the blood of God. Chapter 1495. If he succeeded, not only would Ningxiuema's power not decrease, but it would also increase a lot. She might even be able to break through the earth rank and directly enter the heaven rank level 1, which would be a blessing in disguise. What he did not expect was that when his blood entered her body halfway, her originally slow blood flow suddenly started to boil. It was as if there was originally a sleeping dragon inside, and his divine power was an outsider who had invaded its territory. The dragon rose into the air, bared its fangs and brandished its claws to attack the intruder, vowing to drive the intruder out of its body. Shinjuli was caught off guard, and the divine power he released almost fought with the power in Ningxiuema's body. If they really fought, then Ningxiuema's body would become a battlefield, and in the blink of an eye, her body would be destroyed until not even a strand of hair was left. Therefore, he could only desperately withdraw his divine power when he sensed that something was wrong. He withdrew too quickly, and the divine power quickly backfired and directly hit his own body. In an instant, it was as if he had been pierced by thousands of steel needles. His face turned pale, and cold sweat seeped out. He took half a step back and almost fell off the white jade bed. Without his support, Ningxiuma's body tilted to one side and fell to the ground. It was probably because the power in her body was awakened, and it was boiling and clamoring in her body. Shinjioli could even see the veins on the surface of her skin moving like snakes, undulating like tides. Her face, which was originally slightly red, turned pale again. Sweat seeped out from the tip of her nose, and her teeth unconsciously bit down on her lips. Her lips were bitten until they bled, and 2 drops of blood came out. Although Shinjioli did not know what went wrong, he knew that he could not let her go on like this. Ignoring the pain in his body, he rushed to her side and carried her again, using ordinary telekinesis to guide her blood flow. After all, his telekinesis was strong, and ordinary telekinesis would not trigger the power in her body to fight back. After a while, the power in her body was like a little lion that had been successfully pacified, and it finally calmed down. Shinjioli sighed softly and looked down at Ningxiuma in his arms. His gaze was faintly complicated. What exactly was she? This was the first time he had seen such power. He thought for a moment and used his ordinary telekinesis to search her body again, but he couldn't find anything at all. It was as if the mysterious force in her body had finally gone to sleep after defeating the enemy and was dormant again. Shinjioli raised his hand and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. This matter was somewhat difficult to handle. It seemed like he had to carry out Plan B. Chapter 1496. This kind of healing not only tested his willpower, but also his psychokinesis. It consumed twice as much energy as using God's power. He used his psychokinesis to circulate in her body and was surprised to find that her damaged meridians were recovering automatically. Moreover, the speed of recovery was even faster than when he used his psychokinesis to help her recover. Could it be that he had used his God's power to stimulate the mysterious power in her body? Shinjioli heaved a sigh of relief and slowly withdrew his hand. He then helped her to fix her messy clothes. Since she had started to recover automatically, he could no longer participate in it. Otherwise, the recovery speed of the two forces would be different due to the difference in speed. She might even go crazy because of this. What he needed to do now was to stay by her side and check on her recovery speed from time to time. If he found something wrong, he could make some adjustments. She was lying on the white jade bed as if she was sleeping soundly. He sat beside her and looked at her. He was holding one of her hands the whole time. Perhaps they were really deeply in love with each other. He could only stay by her side quietly for this moment. After that, they would go their separate ways and live their own lives. As for this incident, he needed to know the truth and give her an explanation. Unknowingly, 6 hours had passed. After 6 hours, the door of the quiet room finally opened. Shinjioli slowly walked out from inside. His face was extremely pale, but his steps were still very steady. A red shadow flashed. Shuailan floated down and landed directly in front of him. He stared straight into Shinjioli's eyes and asked, "How is it? Is she okay?" His voice was slightly trembling. He was afraid that something bad would come out of Shinjioli's mouth. She should be fine. Shinjioli was a man of few words. He paused and threw out a medicine bottle. "This is the pill she should take every day. Let her take 3 pills every morning." After that, he turned around and disappeared. Shuailan, this person left too straightforwardly. He didn't even have time to ask the question in his heart. Forget it. Those were all secondary. As long as she could survive, as long as she was fine, everything else was fleeting. Lizine had already been moved back to the small courtyard she used to live in. Although she was unconscious, she was blind and crippled. She would tremble from the pain from time to time, so she needed someone to take care of her. So Yellow Jing and still sent 2 female disciples to wait on her. It was not easy to take care of this kind of patient. She had to wipe its sweat from time to time to prevent the sweat from flowing into the wound and causing infection. It was already the middle of the night, and the 2 disciples were a little tired. One of them was taking a nap on a small bed in the outer room, while the other was dozing off on Lizine's cloud bed. The lights dimmed, and another person suddenly appeared in the room. The female disciple, who was dozing off, opened her eyes in a daze and jumped in fright. He fell to his knees, Di-Zun. She was simply too shocked, so she kowtowed especially loudly. She accidentally knocked her head so hard that she got a bump. An ancestor had unexpectedly broken into this small courtyard in the middle of the night. This had never happened before. She had served Lizine in this courtyard for so many years, but she had never seen Di-Zun. Get out. The ancestor only said 2 words. The disciple didn't say anything else and immediately agreed. She kowtowed again and left, dragging her companion out of the room along with her. Before she left, she didn't forget to close the door for the ancestor. Shinjioli stood in front of Lizine's bed. Later on, she left with Shuilan with hatred, and he did not take back that part of his soul. With that soul in her body, he could still sense her. Although he couldn't sense her emotions, as long as she was on this continent, he could sense her general location. He immediately focused his senses and sensed, but to his surprise, he discovered that Ning Xuemo was actually in the direction of the Heavenly Book Mountain. If she wanted to go to Phoenix City, she would not have passed through Heavenly Book Mountain. Why did she suddenly go to Heavenly Book Mountain? Could it be that he needed to collect some herbs? He knew that Ning Xuemo was extremely smart and quick-witted. That disciple who was following her had most likely been detected by her. In order to confuse that disciple, she deliberately flew in the direction of Phoenix City, but she changed her direction not long after flying. That was how she got rid of the disciple sent by Yellow Jing and. No one knew the dangers of Heavenly Book Mountain better than Shinjioli, especially those spirit beasts on the 9th peak. Even an Earth rank level 9 would be in danger at every step. Chapter 1498. When he thought of his inexplicable panic, he became even more impatient. Therefore, he immediately set off, and in the end, he witnessed such a cruel scene. At that time, he was so angry that he didn't think much about it. After he came back from the rescue, he was so busy that he didn't have time to think. It was only when he was guarding Ning Xuemo that he really calmed down and thought about it. The more he thought about it, the more frightened he became. The more he thought about it, the colder his limbs became. Ning Xuemo was pregnant. With her personality, she would definitely treat the child as a treasure. For the sake of the baby in her womb, she wouldn't purposely find trouble with Lizine, whose psychokinesis was higher than hers. Moreover, only Yellow Jing knew that Lizine went to the forbidden land of spiritual herbs. Ning Xuemo shouldn't have any channels to know about this. Naturally, she wouldn't purposely go to Tianshu Mountain to find trouble with Lizine. At first, he thought that the 2 of them just met on a narrow path. Now, it seemed that things were far from that simple. It was highly likely that Lizine took the initiative to find trouble with Ning Xuemo. If he wanted to find out the truth quickly, he could only find Lizine. Therefore, he rushed back in the middle of the night and went to her room. He looked down at the 9-tailed fox on the bed. Lizine seemed to still be unconscious. Her body trembled from time to time, and she groaned in pain. Obviously, even if she was unconscious, she still felt pain. Shinjioli paused. He couldn't wait any longer. He reached out his hand and was about to use spells to wake her up when he suddenly paused. After looking at her for a moment, he suddenly said, "You don't have to pretend anymore. I know you're awake." Luzine's body trembled, and her ears trembled. She couldn't open her eyes anymore. She turned her head and faced Shinjioli's direction. She groaned again, as if she was crying out her grievances. However, her tongue was gone, and her abdomen was pierced. She had just repaired it, so she couldn't speak ventriloquism. 2 drops of blood dripped from her eyes, as if they were tears. She looked very miserable, but Shinjioli was unmoved. He slowly said, "Let me ask you, how did you meet Ningxiuemo?" Luzine's body stiffened. She couldn't say a word. She whimpered and cried even more profusely. Shinjioli narrowed his eyes slightly. "I need to know the truth. Since you can't speak now, let me read your memories." This sentence caused Luzine's entire body to freeze. It was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, it shrank back and shook its head desperately. It endured the sharp pain in its abdomen and spoke in ventriloquism, "No need. I can write with my hand." Its claws had been reattached. Although it could not use its power, it could still write. It was afraid that Shinjioli would read its memories and obtain information, so it ignored the pain all over its body. With a flash of light, it was about to return to its human form so that it could write. However, just as the light on its body flickered, it felt a sudden chill on its forehead. A finger was placed between its eyebrows. His fingers were so cold that Luzine couldn't help but shiver. Her nose was filled with Shinjioli's unique light fragrance. Luzine originally wanted to get close to him, but now she was so scared that her whole body trembled. She didn't expect Shinjioli to have this ability. Reading memories. Once he read her memories, wouldn't all her secrets be exposed? Woo-woo. She wanted to shake her head violently, but Shinjioli's fingers seemed to have fixed her in place. She couldn't move at all.